いよいよこの日がやってまいりました。バルキリーゲーム決勝戦。熾烈なトーナメントを経て最後まで勝ち抜いた2人のバルキリー。チャンピオンリフ、挑戦者ライオンハートファニー。優勝するのはどちらでしょうか。7、6、5、4、3、2、1。
Around the year 2020, a pandemic devastated the Earth. As it was especially deadly to the juvenile, it came to be called juvosis. The mortality rate exceeded 70% in the early years. It was not possible to properly test for or treat the symptoms. As an entire generation of youth died off, many countries fell into turmoil. A decade passed with little progress. Due to the severe labor shortage caused by the low juvenile survival rate, AI and robotics technology grew rapidly and became widely used. One company, a leader in AI technology, eventually achieved a breakthrough in the treatment of juvosis. They called their miracle cure Balder inhibitors. The experimental suppressants could not be mass-produced, however, and were not widely available to the general public. By the 2040s, Yggdrasil was producing far more Balder inhibitors in a zero-gravity factory on the Misseltine space station. The massive profits this brought, combined with their continued technological development and acquisitions in the AI field, resulted in Yggdrasil becoming the largest publicly traded company by market capitalization and the largest company in history by total assets. This time came to be known as the post-juvosis era. While the disease had not been eradicated, it no longer threatened to destroy humanity entirely. In a celebration of youth, the new technology developed during the 20 years of pandemic was leveraged to create a virtual reality sports spectacle called the Valkyrie Games. Healthy girls would compete against each other in a display humanity once thought it would never see again. Lyfe Bestla joined during the 5th Valkyrie Games. She was cold and uncharismatic. Despite qualifying, she did not win. However, she had a tactical mind and a willingness to train herself without stopping, which quickly gained her a large following of fans. After a year of improvement, she returned and won both the 6th and 7th competitions over the former crowd favorite, Finny Golden. During the 8th Games, a mysterious, giant humanoid creature emerged from the sky above the venue. Many spectators and athletes were killed. Much of the surrounding city was destroyed. The military fought back against the Titans with assistance from every armed force in the city, including the Yggdrasil Security Department. In the aftermath, the Yggdrasil Corporation built a wall around the attack site to prevent the spread of Titans and a substance related to them called Titagen, which fell like snow from the sky. Additional walls were built around an even larger area called the Quarantine Zone to ensure that the Titan threat remained contained. At the same time, Misseltine Station mysteriously malfunctioned. Without the ability to mass-produce Balder inhibitors, humanity once again lived in fear of Juvosis. Riots broke out everywhere, and several groups sprang up in the chaos of the containment zone. The Adventists advocated acceptance of the Titans, while the Coyotes simply wanted to survive as humans despite being cut off from the rest of the world. Eventually, Yggdrasil sent the head of their security department into space to investigate the loss of production, but they lost contact with him, and the station was presumed lost. Some of those injured during the descent of the Titans later developed superhuman abilities, among them Cirrus, Finney, and Lyfe. After being treated by Yggdrasil Corporation, they were trained to use their new abilities in combat and formed a squad whose primary purpose was to be humanity's vanguard against the Titans. Hi, welcome to the Yggdrasil Fire Safety Department. In this video, we'll take a look at Lyfe's original characterization and how it was changed in the Master Love era. In order to keep things relatively brief, we're going to focus on her rewritten Bond story, but before that, we'll set the stage by going over her personal files, base lore, and quickly touching on her main story appearances, up to Chapter 10. There will be spoilers, but most of it is no longer canon, so it shouldn't affect your enjoyment of the game. Just be aware that you're not going to find the character I'm talking about in the game anymore. I'll cover Lyfe's story in roughly chronological order, and, if we're lucky, I'll just give you the important stuff so that we're not here all day. Go ahead and blast me in the comments if the runtime is over an hour. I deserve it. We'll be paying special attention to character motivation and how they express that motivation as their character grows. For our purposes, we'll define character growth as when the way a character expresses their motivations changes due to a conflict between two or more motivations, or a conflict with an obstacle that tests those motivations. This can be brought about by them gaining a new motivation that conflicts with an existing one. Finally, the more deeply held the motivation is, the more it should take to change it. Before we start, let's go over a quick example. Say we have a boy. He lives in a cage and desperately wants to travel the world. In this case, wanting to travel is his motivation, and the cage is an obstacle that prevents that. Thus, he may express that motivation by trying to get out of the cage and eagerly consuming any information from the outside world. We can see that his motivations combine with the circumstances of the world around him to create a certain expression. However, if he only has one motivation, he'll probably be pretty bland. Let's try giving him another. Perhaps he really loves his mother and hopes that nothing bad will ever happen to her. He may wish to bring her along on his travels rather than be separated from her. But maybe the outside world is unsafe. In that case, he'll have to fix that first to avoid putting her in danger. As we give him more and more motivations, while presenting obstacles and conflicts between motivations, his character is naturally fleshed out. From the perspective of the viewer, this can be considered growth, even if his character is technically unchanged. Our understanding of him grows as we learn about additional motivations, see how each motivation ranks when they are brought into conflict with each other, and observe how his motivations are expressed through his actions. Now, let's take a look at Lyfe.
It's personal. Revenge.
Lyfe Bestla was born in the post-Juvosis era, but early enough that her parents had watched 70% of their own childhood friends succumb to the disease before adulthood. They were ecstatic to have a healthy baby and eagerly supported her in everything that she did. Lyfe loved studying military strategy, playing darts, and listening to vintage music. When she joined the Valkyrie Games, her parents were confident she could win, though they loved to see her in action either way. They even had her study ice skating in the off-season to improve her form, as we learn in a base event. During the 8th Games, Lyfe's parents splurged for front row seats so that she could see them cheering her on to her 3rd championship. Instead, she watched in horror as they were crushed to death by Ymir, the first Titan. Lyfe herself was also injured and buried in the rubble, though she was rescued by the security team from Yggdrasil Corporation. The adjutant, who is the main character of the game, was the head of this team. After being treated by the Yggdrasil medical team, Lyfe awoke in their headquarters with a thirst for vengeance. She wanted to kill Ymir, to fight back against the Titans in any way possible. But first, she had to heal. Like others who survived direct contact with a Titan, Lyfe found herself undergoing a process known as manifestation. New nerve structures began growing in her body, and she would, at times, act as if possessed by a god. In her case, she was inhabited by Odin, a god from Norse mythology. If you'll allow me a quick tangent, I want to point out that Lyfe fought using a spear made out of lightning in the Valkyrie Games. She was so skilled with it that she earned the nickname Wednesday. This is because Odin fought with a spear, Gungnir, which was said to never miss its target. His old name, Woden, was incorporated into Woden's Day, or Wednesday. Odin is a god of battle. Unlike other gods of war, like Tyr, who manifests in Haru, Odin is not super tied up about honor. He's something of a wise berserker, an intelligent leader who demonstrates unparalleled battlefield prowess. This mirrors Lyfe's characterization perfectly, and is further explored by her relationship to Haru. Anyway, back on task. On December 30th of 2057, Lyfe was escorted to her room in Yggdrasil headquarters by a member of the medical staff. The physician reminds her to take her medicine promptly and invites her to a New Year's party in the rehab center, but Lyfe flatly declines. The physician doesn't push. She leaves Lyfe with a warning not to make herself sick by setting the air conditioning too low, which Lyfe ignores. Once free of supervision, Lyfe immediately checks her battle simulation. She quickly analyzes the progress of the opposing armies, as is her hobby, but in the middle of her study, the troops begin chanting and praising Odin. Before she can figure out what's going on, she finds herself on the battlefield, fighting Titans. Let's take a quick moment to point out a few more parallels to Odin in Lyfe's combat kit. Odin had 2 ravens which flew around the world each day to bring him news. Lyfe has autonomous combat drones called ravens that shoot her enemies. Odin sacrificed one of his eyes to the well of Ymir in exchange for a drink from its waters which granted wisdom. Lyfe also lost an eye when she was hurt. When Lyfe uses her ultimate, she does so by activating something called the Apotheosis System, which allows her to momentarily draw on the power of the god manifesting within her without losing control. When this happens, her real eye glows blue with Odin's power, but her prosthetic eye remains gold.
This feels like the Valkyrie Games?
The combat experience reminds Lyfe of the Valkyrie Games, but she realizes that it isn't a simulation. Once she clears the enemies, Odin speaks to her. He says that until the snow recedes, these Titans will give us no respite. This mirrors Odin's battle against Ymir in Norse mythology. Odin is the son of an ancient being named Bestla. He slays Ymir, who is an agent of chaos, in order to bring order to the world. In Snowbreak, Lyfe Bestla seeks to slay the Titan Ymir, who not only caused the chaos of the descent, but is associated with the chaos damage type by virtue of being a Titan. Both Odin and Lyfe agree that Ymir must be slain. Admitting this causes Lyfe to flash back to the Valkyrie games and the last dinner she shared with her parents. She also sees her parents' memories from the day of her own birth, which suggests that their consciousness may be floating around somewhere in Valhalla, the sea of information that the Titans in Snowbreak spawn from. As the flashback concludes, Lyfe chants about wounding herself with a spear and hanging on a tree for 9 long nights. This is similar to the chant she says when she uses her ultimate, and is a reference to how Odin pierced his own side with his spear and hung himself from the world tree, named Yggdrasil, for 9 days and nights. Lyfe says she took up the runes while hanging on the tree, just as Odin did in Norse mythology. Finally, Lyfe makes a promise that defines her character arc going forward. She wants to kill Ymir, just like Odin, and she is willing to use whatever power she has at her disposal to do it. But she refuses to cede control of her body. After mirroring Odin so closely, Lyfe swears to herself that she will replace Odin, that she will take his power, but sacrifice nothing in return.
I'll crush you with your own power.
As part of Lyfe's care in the Yggdrasil medical ward, she was supposed to undergo treatment to help her body adjust to the manifestation process. However, as she was the first to receive this care, the doctors were not properly prepared. When Lyfe wakes up, she is taken over by Odin, who lashes out at the physicians and security staff. We can tell that Odin is in control because her real eye is glowing blue. Odin refuses treatment and even punches a hole in a wall made of a reinforced alloy. The staff only manage to restrain him by covering Lyfe's body in foam used to assist jet landings. Tau, the director of Yggdrasil who oversees the manifestations, is summoned to deal with the situation. While she doesn't say anything directly, she seems to have extensive knowledge of how the manifestations operate. She isn't afraid of Lyfe and calmly talks to her about the earlier events, though Lyfe doesn't remember any of the combat. The two note that Lyfe can't punch through walls when Odin isn't controlling her, which is a nod to the absurd jump in power manifestations get when they lose control. Lyfe's initial concern is that she may have hurt someone while Odin was rampaging with her body, but Tau assures her that Yggdrasil's doctors can handle it. Both Lyfe and Tau are incredibly intelligent, socially awkward types who prefer to get right down to business, and it shows. They often speak in incomplete sentences because they just don't need a normal amount of words to understand each other, even though this is the first time they've met. Tau asks Lyfe if she dreamed of hanging herself on a tree, and Lyfe, realizing that the dream may have been a bit more than a dream, correctly guesses that she has been unconscious for 9 days and 9 nights. She is correct. The date is January 9th, 2058. Several years later, Lyfe shares this story with the adjutant while he is overseeing part of her treatment. She says that most of it was told to her by staff members. The adjutant is surprised that she is talking so much, as she is usually extremely frigid, but she seems to be warming up to him in particular, perhaps because her treatments are going more smoothly now that he's taken over. The adjutant says that he can see why she wants revenge on the Titans, and Lyfe reiterates that she's willing to use the power of her manifestation to do it, no matter the cost. She grabs a drink that she set aside earlier, and as an afterthought, holds it up for him and notes that it is her favorite. The drink is named Mimir Sweat. like the fountain of Mimir that Odin drank from to gain wisdom. But we're getting a little ahead of ourselves. Let's take a moment to map out Lyfe's known motivations. To start, we're told in her profile that she really wants to kill the Titans. It's not hard to see why. We can presume that she may have had some motivations toward her family before they were killed, but those can no longer be expressed. Still, it's worth noting that her dominance of the Valkyrie games suggests that she expressed those lost motivations by training harder than anyone else.
These Titans took everything from me, and now I rely on their own power to fight them?
Alright, let's go back to the day Lyfe and the Adjutant met for the first time since the Titans attacked the Valkyrie games. At this point, over a dozen manifestations have been organized into a combat group called the Heimdall Force. In Norse mythology, Heimdall is the guardian of Midgard. In Snowbreak, Midgard is the city that Yggdrasil HQ is located in. Among these manifestations, Lyfe is a standout soldier. Her strategic prowess is absolute, and she has the skills and power to do what the security forces can only dream of. While she wants revenge on Ymir and the rest of the Titans, she always follows direct orders. She sometimes acts in a manner that comes off as reckless to normal soldiers, but she consistently takes out her mark without getting injured herself. In the first mission of Chapter 1, Lyfe has been assigned to investigate an evacuation pod that has landed in the containment zone. She is taking orders from a Yggdrasil employee, Caroline, for this mission. Upon reaching the escape pod, a large Titan appears. It is a Hela type. These Titans are not unique. There are an unknown and potentially infinite number of Hela type Titans. Lyfe asks for permission to use the Apotheosis system to deal with the Titan, as small arms fire can't get the job done. This system allows a manifestation to tap into the power of their Deivos, the god manifesting within them, without losing control to it. Caroline eventually gives her permission, and Lyfe uses Odin's power to critically injure the Titan. The Titan is, understandably, not interested in fighting someone so strong, so it dips. Lyfe asks for permission to pursue and is denied, so she immediately returns to her mission and approaches the pod. Let's pause here because this is actually a very important moment. It is the first sign that Lyfe's initial characterization may have been incomplete or misleading. Early Snowbreak did this with every character, and I may talk about it in depth in future videos, but for now, suffice to say that every character used to be deeper than the initial blurb in their character profile. In this instance, Lyfe was said to be someone consumed by vengeance. That desire was said to be her one and only goal. But as we'll see throughout this video, her actions used to tell a very different story. In this instance, she has a badly injured Titan on the ropes, but she doesn't ignore orders and charge after it. She asks for permission and does not press the matter upon being denied. Following orders is more important to her than killing any particular Titan, perhaps because killing a single Hela is meaningless in the long run. This doesn't mean that her goal isn't to eliminate all of the Titans, just that she doesn't mindlessly fight useless battles, and she does respect the authority of her commanders.
Objective complete. Awaiting orders.
Later in this chapter, the Adjutant directly clarifies Lyfe's feelings on the Titans. He recalls how, shortly after being rescued, she returned to the site of the first descent. When he found her there, she asked how she could join the security forces in order to get revenge on Ymir, the first Titan. Her reason is that Ymir killed her parents right in front of her. Now that the Adjutant has returned and Lyfe is under his command, he asks her directly, if you had to choose between exacting revenge on Ymir or completing the mission, which would you do? She says she doesn't know. He notes that, under specific circumstances, she may easily lose control. We're only in the first chapter, and already we've learned that Lyfe prioritizes orders over killing Titans, with the possible exception of Ymir, the specific Titan she wants revenge against. However, at this point in the story, Ymir hasn't shown up a single time in the 3 years since the descent. Until now. Not long after the adjutant takes charge of the Heimdall force, he is on a mission with Lyfe and Finney when Titagen begins to fall from the sky like snow. This is a sign heralding the coming of a Titan. However, the Titan that appears is none other than the mother of Calamity herself, Ymir. The group first hides in a building, then peers out to take stock of the situation. Lyfe and the adjutant see Ymir at the same time. For a second, the adjutant wonders if he'll get an answer to his earlier question. He does. Lyfe is immediately consumed with emotion. She floods, which means that she loses control and her Deimos, the god manifesting within her, takes over. The adjutant has a cure for flooding, but no time to properly prepare it. However, he doesn't want to let Lyfe fight Ymir alone as, even while flooded, there's no guarantee she would survive. Rather than load the injection into a dart gun as he's supposed to, he instead surprises her with a hug and stabs it into her body directly. It only takes a few seconds to kick in, but her struggle in that time breaks several of his ribs and sears his flesh with electricity. When she returns to her senses, Lyfe's immediate concern is not Ymir, but the adjutant's wounds. She apologizes for hurting him. He says that Ymir will probably show up again, but Lyfe can't get revenge if she's dead. Lyfe doesn't respond to this verbally, but she does move into a corner where she curls up into a ball and cries silently. This incident further clarifies that Lyfe's desire for revenge does not override her desire to be a good soldier. However, she is liable to flood when confronted with the mother of all Titans, Ymir, specifically. Once flooded, Odin will throw her body into battle, if not stopped. When not flooded, Lyfe seems to be able to keep her desire for vengeance in check. She seems to prioritize the well-being of her comrades over throwing herself at Ymir.
Hang back. I'll deal with this.
In Chapter 2, we continue to focus on the adjutant getting to know Lyfe and Finney. The trio is on a mission to investigate the disappearance of a third operative, Nita. Near the beginning of the chapter, we see a lighthearted exchange that gives us more insight into what Lyfe is thinking. Finney says that Nita never accepts her invitations to go out in the town and assumes that she must be a loner. Lyfe responds that Nita doesn't accept because she doesn't enjoy lavish things. The adjutant notes that Lyfe is unexpectedly perceptive when it comes to interpersonal relationships, despite seeming indifferent towards people. He assumes that she just doesn't care about interacting with others, but isn't sure what she does care about. As he ponders on this, they trigger a booby trap, and Lyfe jumps in front of him to shield him from the blast. The adjutant is disoriented and dizzy, but unhurt. Lyfe survives the blast due to being a manifestation, but as the trap was set by the Adventist, the shrapnel was laced with Titagen, which causes her to pass out, but not before she attempts to ask the adjutant if he's all right. Fortunately, there are protocols for such situations, and the adjutant gets to work tending to Lyfe's wounds. As he does, Finney says that Lyfe always puts her own safety second in unexpected situations, as if she has a grudge against her own existence. The adjutant doesn't realize it at this moment, but here is the answer to his earlier question. This is what Lyfe cares about. She doesn't want to see the people around her get hurt, and she's willing to endure anything to prevent them from being harmed. She cares about the people close to her. Her desire to eliminate the Titan stems, in part, from this. It may have started as a quest for vengeance, but her actions tell us that she isn't solely motivated by that. She also wants to prevent additional situations that require vengeance. As the group moves further into the Adventist hideout, they are able to make contact with Nita. However, her speech is garbled due to Titagen interference, and only Finney can make sense of it. They gather that she needs them to go deeper into the hideout. Lyfe is clear that she will follow the adjutant's orders, but she grows increasingly impatient as they are repeatedly delayed. Gradually, her trademark indifference fades into anger and frustration. She unconsciously increases her pace to the point that Finney and the adjutant have trouble keeping up. When confronted by Finney, Lyfe says that they aren't moving fast enough. Every second they waste, the chances of Nita being alive grow slimmer. Finney is surprised to hear this and says that she didn't realize Lyfe cared so much. Lyfe's response gives us the clearest look at her real motivations yet. No one is going to die because I didn't push myself, she says. There was nothing you could have done. Not this time. Not again. She mutters this last part to herself, but the adjutant catches it. He finally understands where she's coming from. The real Lyfe is not blinded by vengeance or indifferent to other people. She blames herself for being too weak to protect her loved ones in the past, and now that she has been granted a great and terrible power, she is absolutely focused on using it to protect everyone in the present. This is why she shields others from danger at the expense of her own well-being. This is why she trains so hard that she neglects her interpersonal relationships. It is not because she doesn't care about others, but because she does.
Not again.
As the chapter ends, the team, now reunited with Nita, comes across prisoners who are suffering Titagen exposure to various degrees. The adjutant knows that the correct call, according to protocol, is to get his team out first. However, he decides to rescue as many people as he can anyway. Lyfe, unsurprisingly, supports this decision. In fact, the adjutant's tendency to show concern for civilians and even enemy factions quickly earns him Lyfe's respect. We see this again in Chapter 3, when the team fights their way into a coyote stronghold. Rather than bullets, they use sleeper ammunition, which simply knocks enemies out for a while. The adjutant also instructs them to inflict minimal casualties and allows time to aid civilians who get caught in the crossfire. Finney points out that the adjutant has made writing his post-mission report far more complicated due to these decisions, but she and Lyfe emphatically agree with his actions. Let's recap real quick. Lyfe is initially presented to us as a girl whose only goal is to get revenge on the Titans. She is said to be cold and indifferent to the people around her and uninterested in forming relationships. Even before the descent, she had a frigid personality. However, she is a fighter. While she did not win in her Valkyrie Games debut, she put in the work to improve herself and took the next 3 games by storm. After the Titans' attack, she attuned that same work ethic to training her new power with the purpose of eliminating the Titans. But her motivation for doing so is a desire to protect the people around her, as she feels that only she can. She is not willing to endanger anyone in the name of vengeance because that would defeat the purpose. We see this in her Wednesday personal foul, where her first question after flooding is, "Did I hurt anyone?" We see it in the early chapters, where she insists on being in the field, shields the adjutant from a trap, and pushes herself to rescue Nita. We see it in the way that she appreciates the adjutant's efforts to minimize harm to the coyotes. We even see it where, after initially losing her composure upon seeing Ymir, her immediate regret is not being unable to chase the Titan, but that she hurt the adjutant with the power of the Titans she carries within her. Put simply, Lyfe is the champion of humanity. She is the strongest fighter we have, and she attempts to carry the weight of the world on her back. She wants to solve our problems and protect us from our enemies simply by being as strong as she possibly can, no matter the strain it puts on her.
I did what I had to. Nothing more.
Now that we have a firm grasp on Lyfe's motivations, let's take a closer look at her capabilities. Sometime after the events of Chapter 3, the adjutant hears something shocking from Lyfe. He's sitting across the table from her in her room, very nearly freezing to death. On the table, an assortment of model soldiers are meticulously laid out in a reenactment of some past battle. Lyfe offers no explanation at first. 10 minutes pass without any word or movement from her. When the adjutant asks for an explanation, Lyfe reveals that she's reviewing a battle from May of 2058, about 5 months after she gained manifestation powers. She was deployed with Security Department recruits in a routine field test for her Wild Hunt exosuit, which had finished development in March of that year. The test went terribly wrong. The group was surrounded by minions of the Titans. They ran out of bullets and energy. The apotheosis system had not yet been invented, so Lyfe couldn't even safely tap into her Daewals for power. The recruits fell or fled before the onslaught. Only Lyfe remained. She knew at the time that retreating meant they would all die, but fighting didn't seem possible. Still, she resolved to fight, even if she had to do it alone. Her memory from that point is fragmented. She knows that the Titans turned back and she was carried home by her comrades, but tactically, she can't understand why the Titans didn't win. The adjutant has no answer for her, but he is surprised to hear that Lyfe actually got injured on a mission. He thinks to himself that no matter how reckless her actions seem to get, she never comes back injured. In fact, other than the story she just told him, he can't think of a single time where she got hurt fighting Titans. He initially went to talk to her because of her reckless excursions, but not because she was in danger. She was just burning through equipment as her gear couldn't keep up with her skill. Now, having heard about a time where Lyfe stood alone against the enemy, he thinks that learning the truth about that battle might give him some insight as to why Lyfe tends to take matters into her own hands. The adjutant accesses the records for the mission and finds that the original plan was simply to walk through the zones. Little to no opposition was expected. However, the changed, humans that have been corrupted by exposure to Titans, seemed attracted to the presence of manifestations. While most of the soldiers were content to leisurely stroll through the mission, Lyfe took point and reported every enemy when she saw it and when she killed it. The exercise was rerouted several times to avoid the worst of them, but they eventually found themselves overwhelmed and pinned down. The recruits tried to break through the enemy lines, but failed. Their ammunition was exhausted, and casualties were quickly piling up, while more and more enemies emerged from the snow. Worse, the thick Titan contamination blocked their communications with the Yggdrasil headquarters. They had no way to fight, and no way to call for help. Recruits that were cut off from the main group were surrounded and quickly killed. Naturally, the remaining soldiers panicked, but not Lyfe. She continued picking off enemies and reporting over short-range communications. Despite the overwhelming odds, she stuck to her training. She also realized that retreat was impossible. Their only chance of survival was to fight, not run. For a moment, her efforts seemed to have worked. She broke a hole in the enemy lines, but lacked the firepower to hold it open by herself. Still, while the soldiers thought she was a lunatic, Her success inspired them to get a hold of themselves and help her as best they could, but they lacked the ammunition to contribute much at all. Let's step back for a moment. Lyfe is a manifestation of Odin, remember? In her base exosuit, she has drones called ravens, just like Odin had 2 raven familiars. But Odin also had 2 wolves, Gary and Freki. In her Wild Hunt exosuit, which director Tal developed to keep Lyfe's body temperature low enough to prevent nerve pain, Lyfe has access to 2 devices that spawn wolf's fangs made of ice. Using these, she can kill enemies without burning much ammunition. The game subtly acknowledges this in the combat section of the personal file, where you have limited ammunition and must use the wolf's fangs to eliminate a group of change without reloading. The enemies continue to flood in, and Lyfe continues blowing holes in their formation. They can't close in because of her, but she lacks the firepower to break out on her own. Eventually, her own bullets exhausted, she fights the enemies with her fists. She realizes that the chains are packed so tight that she can knock one into another and cause a chain reaction that leaves them all on the ground. Her leg muscles are worn out at this point, but she manages to summon the strength to keep moving just a little longer.
Out of bullets. My legs are gone. Won't be able to run.
Lyfe doesn't realize it at this moment, but she is actually tapping into her Delos here and stealing some of Odin's power to use for her own purposes. Her body is exhausted, but a glimpse of divine strength keeps her moving. Remember, at the end of her Wednesday personal file, she vowed to replace Odin to take his power as her own. However, it is only now, when the lives of her comrades rely on her success, that she was first able to do so, if only a tiny bit. This is because, again, Lyfe's true motivation is not plain revenge, but a desire to protect others from harm. Her method of protecting them is by eliminating the Titans, including getting vengeance on Ymir herself. As Lyfe single-handedly breaks through the chains, several medium Titans appear to block her progress. She calls out a challenge to them and says she will crush them with their own power.
Titans, come get me. I'm over here. I'll crush you with your own power.
What happens next is not recorded, but it led to the immediate retreat of the changed. The security force trainees can't believe they have been saved. One jokes about being taken away by a Valkyrie. In Norse mythology, Valkyries escorted the souls of fallen warriors from the battlefield. And in Snowbreak, Lyfe is famous for her participation in the Valkyrie games. However, the opposite happens here. Lyfe has lost consciousness on her feet and is carried away by her comrades instead. The adjutant is astounded by these records and seeks out Caroline to learn more about the Wild Hunt exosuit Lyfe was wearing. She tells him that Lyfe has to stay in a low-temperature environment to relieve pain from a permanent fever she's had ever since becoming a manifestation. She wears specially made, ice-cold underclothes now so that she can function somewhat normally. This is why she keeps her room so cold. In a base puzzle reward, we also learned that she used to turn the temperature in the common area down as well until operative access to the temperature controls was revoked. Caroline says the fevers came with full-body nerve pain and remarks that no one else could have survived such torture apart from the cat girl. The cat girl, for the record, is Malkshire. She has a condition that renders her unable to feel pain, which is why she would survive this. The adjutant wonders if Lyfe is still caught up in that battle because, like the Descent, it is a time where people around her died and she couldn't save them. Perhaps she wonders if whatever she did that caused the change to retreat could have been done sooner. She wonders if, had she pushed herself a little harder, people would not have died. Just in case, the adjutant has Lyfe don the Wild Hunt exosuit for a mission later. She complains that it's not necessary anymore because she has the apotheosis system, which allows her to tap into her Daywolves without risk of flooding. She also confirms his suspicions by saying that the exosuit couldn't change anything. She clearly blames herself for being unable to summon whatever power saved those recruits earlier. This personal foul reinforces some things we already knew about Lyfe. She is a diligent soldier with a sharp, tactical mind. She considers herself responsible for the well-being of her comrades and is motivated to maintain their safety. Whenever people get hurt around her, she blames herself and trains even harder to prevent such situations in the future, to the point that she neglects to build interpersonal relationships. But, on top of all that, it shows us that she is immensely strong. She is not shy about acting on her own in order to save her comrades, but she hasn't been injured in battle since May of 2058. She's not reckless. She's just so strong. The feat that appears reckless to us is just another Wednesday for her. Lyfe has, by pushing herself beyond human limits, become an awesome soldier. But even then, her power is not enough to ensure the well-being of all humanity. She is fighting a battle that cannot be won with tactics and power alone.
Lyfe Bestla, Heimdall Force, reporting.
Every character in Snowbreak has what's called a bond story. It unlocks over time as the character goes on missions or receives gifts and, at the launch of the game, covered a time period or specific event where the main character gets to know an operative better and grows closer to them. We'll get more into what they've changed into later, but for now, let's look at how the character we've seen so far was portrayed in a narrative climax of her story. Canonically, this bond story seems to take place between chapters 3 and 4. The story opens with Lyfe returning from a mission with the adjutant and a handful of other Heimdall operatives. Finney and the adjutant appear to consider the mission a success, though it wasn't completely perfect. They fought a Hela-type Titan and seriously injured it, but it managed to run away, so they retreated. Lyfe is not happy about this. The adjutant asks why she looks so serious, and she asks him why he gave the order to retreat. In her estimation, they likely could have destroyed it if they pursued. The adjutant is sure he must have had a reason, but he can't remember it. He says something about the environment being complex and him having to consider multiple factors, but even he doesn't find it convincing. Lyfe, while unhappy, calmly says that she believes they missed a great opportunity. Even Finney finds Lyfe's assessment compelling. So the adjutant suggests they review the combat footage, and he heads off to do so with Lyfe. They meet with the director's secretary, Caroline, who immediately senses the tension in the air. First, they use a holographic projector to analyze the options they had. The first two were no good, but the third seems plausible when just looking at the data. Caroline says they can use Regius, a supercomputer, to calculate what their odds of success may have been. Regius confirms that the first two options had little chance to succeed, but it says the third had an 81% chance of defeating the Titan. Lyfe quips that, with her skills, it would have been 100%, which is, fair. As we've seen, she's really good at her job. She routinely does things that others would consider impossible. After saying this, Lyfe walks out immediately. She's clearly upset. Caroline says that everyone makes mistakes and notes how Lyfe is particularly keen on defeating Titans. The adjutant insists that he must have had some reason, but Caroline just calls him stubborn and suggests he apologize to Lyfe when she escorts him on another mission later that day. Instead, he instructs her to give Lyfe the rest of the day off. He says something about the mission not being dangerous and the security department being able to handle it, but Caroline doesn't buy it. Nevertheless, she dutifully gives Lyfe the day off. The mission is, as the adjutant predicted, boring and completely safe. His job is just to babysit some scientists while they scrape rocks or something. Meanwhile, his mind wanders back to the look Lyfe gave him in the command room. To himself, he admits that he must have made a mistake somewhere, whether he's looking at it from an emotional or rational point of view. But his true concern is that he has lost Lyfe's trust. Let's take a brief moment to consider the adjutant's character here. At times, he remarks that he used to be a cold and calculating person. However, after being rescued from the escape pod in Chapter 1, an extra nerve structure has appeared in his brain. It's similar to the kind that is found in manifestations and, according to Yggdrasil's best scientists, is causing him to act with much more empathy than usual. We don't need to get into all the details, but that empathy, combined with his on-the-field decisions, is what has endeared him to the operatives under his command. We see this on display when his primary concern, after supposedly making a mistake, is that he has lost someone's trust. Ultimately, the adjutant decides to check out the area where Hela disappeared earlier. He thinks that if he just sees it again, he might remember why he ordered the retreat, and thus be able to give Lyfe an appropriate reason and regain her trust. The distance isn't far from where the security forces are guarding the scientists, so it shouldn't be too dangerous. Upon reaching the scene, he recalls how Finney led the charge, while Frisia and Lyfe attacked from the flanks. This is in character for all of them. Finney is always leading the charge, when she can. She is also a former Valkyrie Games contestant and was known for bravely charging in with her fist. Now, she uses a shotgun, but she still prefers to get in close.
Camera pulls in on our star!
His thoughts are interrupted by a warning from his chorus system. Titan incoming. He was so engrossed with figuring out his earlier decision that he didn't notice the telltale snow-like Titan drifting from the sky. His training kicks in immediately. He knows exactly where the nearest bunker is and makes a dash for it, but then the Titan appears. It's a Hela type, and judging from the bullet holes in its right leg, it's the very Hela that escaped during the earlier mission. The Titan is massive. Defeating it on his own is impossible, but it just walks away. Hela doesn't even seem to notice him. It walks away in the same direction that it fled in earlier. The adjutant sees this as an opportunity to discover the reason behind his earlier decision and follows it from a distance. Sometime later at Yggdrasil headquarters, Finney and Frisia are hounding Caroline about the adjutant's absence. The operatives are concerned for the adjutant's safety as he has gone missing, but less than 24 hours have passed, so no company resources can be used to search for him yet. According to Caroline, the adjutant has the right to act as he pleases. They can't assume he needs a rescue just because he's gone no contact for a while. A moment later, they notice that Lyfe is missing from the room. She was, Frisia says, right behind them, but now she's gone. Finney says that Lyfe doesn't care about the rules, but she has no reason to expect that she would go in search on her own. After all, we've already seen that Lyfe will give up pursuing a Titan if given the order. She did that in Chapter 1 and again at the beginning of this Bond story. She respects the rules, even if she doesn't care about them. At least, we've seen that she values the rules above killing any particular Titan, with the possible exception of the unique Titan, Ymir. But we have also seen that she will not allow harm to come to anyone if there's something she can do about it. As she said when saving Nita, no one is going to die because she didn't push herself. Whether that means she has to train harder than anyone else, or whether it means that she studies strategy to the point that she neglects socializing with other operatives, whatever it takes, she will do anything to save whoever she can. So when we next see Lyfe, it is no surprise that she is headed out to search and rescue on her own. She doesn't try to hide it. She tells the guard that she doesn't have permission to leave, but that she is going to leave. Unfortunately for those poor Yggdrasil employees, they find themselves in a position where they must fight Lyfe Bestla, Valkyrie Games champion and soldier extraordinaire, just to keep their jobs. We can only hope they were compensated fairly. Meanwhile, the adjutant has been injured and trapped under debris. It turns out that his reluctance to chase Hela had been well placed. The Titan ambushed him once he was too far from his team. His communicator is broken. Slowly, it dawns on him that he is going to bleed out before anyone organizes a search and rescue. Lyfe searches around the area of the adjutant's mission, but finds nothing. She is contacted by Finny and Freesia, who give her information that may lead to his whereabouts. They promise to help smooth things over with the top brass and cheer her on. She follows their information and finds an area with intense Titan contamination. It seems that Hela is using the adjutant as bait. Sure enough, enemies emerge as Lyfe closes in on his last known location. Too many for anyone to handle alone. Too many, even, for Lyfe Bestla. As she is worn down, Odin attempts to take over. However, Lyfe knows that Odin only cares about killing Titans. He won't save the adjutant. So she wrests control back from him and faces the impossible task on her own. The adjutant can hear gunshots. He doesn't know who it is or what kind of force they've brought, but Lyfe is the first name that pops into his head. He tries to get her attention, but he's lost too much strength and his voice wouldn't carry through all the rubble anyway. He tries banging a rock on a pipe, but it's futile. The effort exhausts him. He feels his consciousness fading. And what may be his last moment, his regret is that he didn't simply apologize to Lyfe earlier. He wasn't wrong to order the retreat, but he should have known that giving up a kill would be frustrating to her. Besides, if he had just told her he made the decision to protect the operatives, surely she would understand. After all, no one was more eager to keep everyone safe than Lyfe. The adjutant hears footsteps, close this time. He calls out again. After what feels like forever, the sound of shifting rubble and falling rain heralds the presence of another. Someone moves the concrete blocks overhead and drops into the pit with him. It seems to be Lyfe, but a flash of lightning reveals that Odin is in control. The adjutant's heart sinks. He watches, helplessly, as Odin prepares a spear of lightning that will put him out of his misery. Until the lightning dissipates, Odin is gone, and Lyfe falls into his arms, exhausted. The adjutant calls for help on her communicator, and the ordeal comes to an end. I want to unpack this moment a bit. It's extremely important. Lyfe found herself in a situation where her strength wasn't going to be enough to save someone. While powerful, she can't fight an endless horde of titans and throw chunks of buildings around without the strength of the god manifesting within her. Let's recall her declaration in her Wednesday personal file. She said that she would take Odin's strength as her own and use it to her ends. She said that she would replace him. Despite that promise, she still lost control to him the second Ymir showed up. She couldn't safely tap into his power without the apotheosis system. She had pushed herself to her limits, but she was no closer to wiping out the Titans than when she began. Until now. When Lyfe tried to overcome Odin in the name of vengeance, it turned out that his desire for vengeance was even stronger than hers. She couldn't control him because her motivation empowered him. But when the stakes changed, when she needed to overcome Odin to save a dear friend, she defeated him. She took Odin's power and used it to kill the enemies in her way and toss aside the rubble, trapping the adjutant. When he was no longer needed, she forced him to disappear. Lyfe Bestla, more than anything else, does not want anyone to suffer because of the Titans. She wants vengeance, sure, but as we have seen, vengeance is not what brings out the best in her. When she fought the horde of enemies in her Wild Hunt personal foul, or when she raced to save Nita, or when she dared to save the adjutant, Lyfe is motivated by saving others from harm. Those are the moments where she is able to bring out her best power. Realizing this was the key to forcing a god to bend to her will.
We shouldn't just be thinking of the Titans as adversaries. We should be thinking of them as prey.
After 3 days of rest, the adjutant is back on his feet. He got off with a slap on the wrist. It seems Caroline was correct that he can act however he pleases. Director Tao simply forbids him from going on missions without any Heimdall Force operatives in the future. Lyfe, however, is facing severe punishment due to all the rules she broke and the armed confrontation with security personnel. The adjutant goes to bat for her with the director. His arguments are sound and Tao definitely has better things to do, so she gives in and lets Lyfe off the hook. Meanwhile, Nita and Finney are amazed at how the adjutant doesn't seem to fear the director. Finney is also amused at how the great and powerful Lyfe ended up being carried back to base in his arms after exhausting herself to save him. Lyfe, for her part, is simply too tired to care about the ravings of a dandelion. Her physical wounds healed quickly due to her manifestation powers, but the mental stress of using her abilities to that extent will take a while longer to overcome. When the adjutant catches up with Lyfe, he eagerly tells her that he has convinced Director Tao to drop her punishment. Lyfe is surprised. Before she can respond, he immediately apologizes for his decision to retreat at the beginning of the Bond story. He says that he was worried she might get hurt pursuing Hela, but that he should have trusted her more. But Lyfe is already over it. She says that he only had 10 seconds to make that decision, and that it was reasonable. She apologizes for being too impatient. The adjutant begins to insist that he should have ordered a pursuit, but Lyfe just laughs. It is such a rare event that he freezes in surprise. Lyfe heads for the counter in the hall and remarks that she hasn't had any Mimir soda lately, her favorite, due to being in treatment. The adjutant finally takes the hint. Whether they were right or wrong back then isn't important. What matters is that they understand that both of them are acting in the best interests of the other, to the best of their abilities. But perhaps he's still feeling a bit guilty, as he offers to treat her to a drink. For the sake of time, we're going to end the story of the original Lyfe there. She makes several more important appearances and has more character growth going forward, but if we don't save that for a future video, this is going to be 3 hours long. To recap, we are introduced to Lyfe as someone whose sole concern is getting vengeance on the Titans, but we quickly see that her feelings are more complex than that. Over the course of the first 3 chapters, we learn about Lyfe, but she doesn't change much as she isn't confronted with any obstacles that would force her to do so. These chapters establish who she is beneath the surface. She presents herself as an avatar of vengeance, but we see her pass on enacting vengeance to follow orders. The one time she does lose control, she regrets it and laments that she harmed someone, like the Titans do. We see her push herself to protect others, time and time again. We learn that it is this desire to protect, not vengeance, that motivates her to hold herself to such high standards, to train herself to surpass her limits. We discover that her icy personality isn't because of indifference or inability to navigate relationships, but because those high standards leave no room to relax and enjoy the company of the people around her. In her Bond story, Lyfe is forced to decide between 2 conflicting expressions of her motivations. Does she want to kill the Titans for vengeance, or does she want to kill them to protect people? She doesn't go rogue to kill a Titan, because that desire isn't stronger than her respect for rules and order. But she does go rogue to protect someone threatened by Titans, because this is the true expression of her motivations. This results in a change that is a natural outgrowth of her character arc. She still wants to protect people by destroying the Titans, but she also realizes that she doesn't have to do that alone. She has capable allies who share her goals and are willing to take on some of the load. In this way, she is freed from the backward-facing goal of mere vengeance and can instead pursue the forward-facing goal of creating a better world. That is, one that does not include Titans, but does include the relationships she's built with her allies. It is no surprise, then, that her character growth from this point includes the tension between her training taking up all of her time and her desire to actually befriend the rest of the Heimdall force.
After the holiday, it's straight on to the next mission.
Her Bond story is, in my estimation, a romance. It is the climax of her discovering, through her relationship to the adjutant, that vengeance is not enough. And, more importantly, she isn't willing to sacrifice anyone but herself to get it. She admires him because he, too, is unwilling to make sacrifices other than himself. Whether it's using sleeper bullets to infiltrate the coyotes despite the mountain of paperwork it creates, or prioritizing Nita and her fellow prisoners' lives over strictly following the rules. The adjutant is an empathetic leader. He wants to save everyone he can in any way that he can. Not only that, but he values the trust his operatives have in him and will take serious risks to maintain it. And look, I'll just drop all the fancy words for a second. I really, really like that.
They call me Wednesday. That's not who I am.
Now, moving forward, I need to make clear that the developers are creating a new canon. They've stated that if there are any inconsistencies between the old and new material, that the old material should be considered discarded. With that in mind, let's take a look at the new Bond story that replaced the one we just went over and see what kind of changes they made to bring her character in line with the demands of the new direction. Just to be extra clear, I'm not making this comparison to say that one is better than the other. The two stories are meant to do different things, so a general comparison kind of misses the mark. My goal is to explore what kind of changes are necessary to change a regular romance into a new Snowbreak romance. Some people will prefer the old, others will prefer the new. I'm not here to police your preferences. At the same time, I need to warn you that the writing we see in this new Bond story is not necessarily representative of what we see in other new material. It seems to have been rushed, you'll see what I mean, but our primary concern is Lyfe's motivations, so hopefully we won't get sidetracked by discussing the writing quality. For anyone that wasn't around at the time, the Snowbreak devs declared a change in the game's direction in early 2024. That change took some time to manifest, but by April, they were fully committed. In July of that year, they revised Lyfe's Bond story and, in doing so, contradicted much of the old canon to establish a new one. They also changed the description for Lyfe in the archive. It used to say that her sole purpose in life was to seek revenge on the Titans. After the update, it adds, however, as she spent time close to the adjutant, she gradually let go of her hate. This is, on its own, only a slight departure from the old canon. We didn't go over base events before to save time, but I want to point one out here. The adjutant notices Lyfe applied for a more intense training regimen and is looking a little pale. He says she's been pushing herself even harder since the Titans expanded their area of attack outside of the containment zone. Lyfe notes that containment of the Titan contamination isn't really possible, and people are suffering all over the world with no hope of improvement. The adjutant wonders if the Heimdall force can really ascend to become the saviors of mankind, but Lyfe insists that she's no savior, just someone trying to get vengeance. She says that as long as the adjutant is around, she won't lose sight of that. In the old canon, Lyfe never let go of her desire for vengeance. Ymir crushed her parents, after all. However, she learned how to handle that desire in a healthy way, one that didn't choke her other desires, like protecting people from harm. Lyfe says she is no savior, but she's training herself beyond her limits in an effort to save everyone she can. When she tells the adjutant that she's just someone trying to get vengeance, She is acknowledging the limits of her own power. She's saying that she won't go too far and needlessly sacrifice herself for nothing. It is true that her relationship with the adjutant modified how she approached her relationship to the Titans, but the way the two canons handle it is very different. In the old canon, the adjutant helps her advance her goals in a better, healthier way. In the new canon, as we shall see in the new Bond story, the adjutant replaces the Titans as her goal. Lyfe's new Bond story is framed not as an ongoing incident, but as something the adjutant is directly remembering. This calls into question how he remembers the bits he wasn't present for, but we're not going to worry about that today. Internal inconsistency is a hallmark of the new canon. It's trying to tell stories about how much each operative loves the adjutant, rather than attempting to do any consistent world building. So keeping the details straight isn't all that important. I'm sure I won't be able to resist pointing some things out, but at the end of the day, this is just a change in style. The new story begins in the same place as the old one. The adjutant has just returned to base with Lyfe, Finney, and Freesia after a mission where they fought but did not defeat a Hela-type Titan. The adjutant notes that no one on the force was injured. The first major change comes in Lyfe's first line. Instead of questioning why the order to retreat was given, she says that Hela got away because of her mistake. The adjutant explains that she was standing right in front of it, so she got hit the most, and therefore it's understandable that her aim would be off. This seems to contradict his earlier statement on no one getting injured. It's also a departure from how the battle played out in the old story. Before, Finney was leading the charge while Freesia and Lyfe attacked from the flanks. Leading the charge is, after all, Finney's primary role. Her Lionheart exosuit even gets bonus damage for being in close range. In her Valkyrie Games days, when Lyfe pulled out a throwing spear made out of lightning, Finney jumped in to throw hands. Furthermore, we know from Lyfe's Wild Hunt personal foul that she never gets injured on missions, according to the adjutant. To be clear, this doesn't mean the writers made a mistake, necessarily. As I said earlier, when there is a contradiction between old material and new material, the new material is supposed to replace the old. Here, the writers have chosen to retcon the team's formation and Lyfe's combat prowess. Moving on, Lyfe nearly repeats an exact line from the previous story, but substitutes her mistake for the adjutant's order. She says that hitting Hela would have destroyed it, and blames herself for missing the attack. Previously, she claimed that pursuing Hela would have resulted in its destruction, and questioned why the adjutant chose not to. After saying this, Lyfe walks out by herself, as she wants to be alone. The adjutant thinks to himself for a bit about how the descent affected the operatives' lives. He says that Lyfe was hit especially hard, so it's difficult to talk her out of having an icy hatred for the Titans, or from holding herself to a high standard. He says that the obsession festering deep within her bones couldn't be changed by words alone. Can you see what's different about this? In the previous canon, Lyfe was initially presented as someone who only cared about revenge on the Titans, but from her first appearance in the first mission of the game, we were shown that her true nature was more complex. Over the 3 chapters that we covered, it became clear that Lyfe's obsession wasn't eliminating Titans, but protecting everyone from the harm the Titans caused, the harm that befell her parents. This is why she holds herself to such a high standard. In the new canon, it seems that Lyfe is actually just obsessed with killing Titans. They keep the part about her holding herself to a high standard, but that doesn't seem to have translated to any particular competency on the battlefield. Instead, it's the reason why she's sad when she makes a mistake. It's changed from being a motivation to improve to a reason for the adjutant to cheer her up. The adjutant talks his way out of celebrating the mission success with Finney and Freesia and decides to go after Lyfe. He bumps into Caroline in the hallway, literally. He tells her that he's looking for Lyfe, and she casually pulls out a tablet and locates Lyfe almost instantly. She was caught on camera leaving the base not long ago. I don't really understand how she was able to just walk out with no one noticing if their surveillance is to the point that Caroline can locate her in a few taps? Are there no guards, like in the previous Bond? Does the system not notify anyone when a prized asset just walks out the door? Anyway, Caroline says she'll give Director Tao a heads up if the adjutant wants to go after her. He does. Alone. We cut to Lyfe. She's all alone in the drowned sections, in areas so contaminated that even the Heimdall Force only deploys there for special missions. In all of the first 10 chapters, they only enter the drowned sections in Chapter 10. The fact that she saw fit to enter the area alone is already a huge tactical blunder. She shoots a few enemies, which attracts many more enemies, another tactical blunder. She abandons all attempts at stealth and is about to start shooting again when she suddenly feels a hand on her shoulder. It's the adjutant. He has caught up to her, and she failed to notice his approach. Once he appears, she forgets about the enemies in front of her and instead scans him for injuries. Since she's too worried to fight, he grabs her hand holding her gun, slowly aims it, and shoots the enemies. We can add to our list of changes that Lyfe is no longer a well-studied tactical genius. She also lacks the self-awareness to notice someone sneaking up on her and the battlefield presence to shoot enemies bearing down on her when the adjutant is nearby. Put another way, her worry for the adjutant is so strong as to be distracting, which I think is the angle they were going for. We're no longer dealing with Lyfe the champion, but that sort of makes sense. The purpose of this new story is to make the adjutant the center of her life. We already saw that she's no longer motivated to improve her skills. She's driven by pure hatred, and her character arc is going to be that she will be driven by love for the adjutant instead. Right now, those two motivations are competing. In a way, this is the same method they used in the previous story, only then her desire for vengeance was competing with her desire to protect people. Her love for the adjutant guided her in resolving that and grew as a result, but it didn't become her new obsession. The adjutant tells Lyfe that he has come to chase down Hela, which surprises her. She says it's too dangerous, and he teases her since she was planning to do it alone in the first place. Lyfe acknowledges that she doesn't want to go back without killing Hela, but hesitates on whether she's okay with the adjutant coming. He simply grabs her arm and takes off running. He says that, just this once, they will go crazy together. This seems to be a modification of how Lyfe is known to go all out against Titans. As we discussed in her Wild Hunt personal foul, she may look like she's being reckless, but she never gets hurt during it, and in the old canon, usually gets the kill as well. She wasn't going crazy before, but that appears to be the case in the new canon. After all, she's just snuck out of base and launched a solo mission into the drowned sections, all in order to kill a Hela. Keep in mind, Hela is not a unique Titan like Ymir. There are a functionally infinite number of Hela-type Titans. More can always be made. Chasing any particular one down doesn't help anyone. Killing it would diminish the enemy's resources to some extent, but it's not worth such a huge risk. It makes sense that Lyfe would be upset in the old canon about missing an easy opportunity to do so, but it wouldn't have made sense for her to chase it down alone. In the new canon, it makes sense for her to do so because she is truly obsessed with killing Titans to the point that she can't think clearly about them. The two quickly locate Hela thanks to the chorus system. In the old canon, the chorus system alerted the adjutant to high Titagen levels. Certain levels could herald the appearance of a Titan. However, it isn't a radar. At least it didn't used to be, but this is one of those details I should probably just let go. The important part is that the two find Hela quickly. Luckily, it is the same Hela from the earlier fight. It is sitting with its back to the wall, repairing itself. They devise a plan to lure it away from the wall so that Lyfe can attack its core and kill it. The adjutant says he will get its attention and says they will retreat if she fails to kill it again. Lyfe says she'll hold it off so he can retreat, but he declines. Then he says something very curious. He says that she ignored all danger when she was acting alone and chose the worst plan possible when she was with someone else. Let's unpack that. In this canon, Lyfe is reckless, foolish, and a relatively poor fighter. She seems to have no tactical ability whatsoever, and, furthermore, is said to make the worst possible decisions when she's with someone else. Yet the adjutant's words here are direct callbacks to things we've seen before. In her Wild Hunt personal file, he says that her actions can seem reckless, but he states that she never comes back injured, so the implication is that her skills allow her to safely do things that would be reckless for others. In Chapter 2, after Lyfe shields the adjutant from a bomb using her body, Finney says that she always puts her own safety second when she finds herself in an unexpected situation. She remarks that Lyfe seems to have a grudge against her own existence. Back then, we are meant to understand that Lyfe is willing to sacrifice herself to protect others. In the new canon, she is genuinely reckless when alone, and is apparently very bad at decision-making when with others. If we're generous, we can assume that she takes on the most dangerous roles herself. That could explain why she was on the front lines instead of Finney in this bond. And if we translate the Cantonese directly, it does roughly say that she always cares about other people's safety over her own. However, if we machine translate it instead of asking a native speaker, we get something close to the actual English text that appeared at the time it was released. In fact, every language except for Japanese seems to have just been machine translated and slightly cleaned up. The Japanese text for the new bond says, "She's always been like that. Although she doesn't care about herself, she always prioritizes the safety of her companions over anything else." This is different from what the Cantonese says when machine translated into Japanese, so that team seems to have edited the line to reflect the proper meaning. Moving forward, we'll have to be careful to ensure lines actually mean what they say by cross-referencing with other languages. The adjutant warns her that he will only retreat when she has retreated. She says that if it's for him, she won't mess up. The adjutant notes that the pessimism disappears from her gaze and a chilling determination exudes from her entire body. This signals that, in the new canon, Lyfe's combat ability is the result of a desire to please the adjutant rather than a natural outgrowth of the high standards she holds herself to. She can still be strong, but it is for the adjutant's sake rather than due to a desire to protect everyone. Technically, she is still motivated to get vengeance on Titans and protect people, but killing Titans is no longer an expression of her motivation to protect people. They are separate and unrelated motivations. Likewise, the high standards she holds herself to are not the result of wanting to push herself to protect people. The adjutant suggests they are related to the descent, but we don't see those standards resulting in the power she needs to protect people. Instead, they result in her moping around after making a mistake and, later, recklessly chasing a Titan into the drowned sections. Since the expression of the motivation is different, our perception of the base motivation changes. The adjutant pulls out the submachine gun that he borrowed from the security department before leaving and, hang on, he has a gun? So back then when he grabbed Lyfe's gun while it was in her hands and sprayed enemies like she was some sort of battle toddler, why didn't he just shoot them with his own gun? This gun is never mentioned before this point, and you know what? This is just one of those details. We're just going to let it go. The adjutant pulls out the submachine gun that he borrowed from the security department before leaving and opens fire on Hela. He then turns around and books it. His thoughts tell us that Titans are more like sophisticated devices than biological creatures. They are extremely predictable. He is able to dodge attack after attack without ever turning around to look at Hela just because he has the pattern memorized. On one hand, this is pretty cool. I like seeing his experience come into play. On the other hand, it really calls into question how a team of 3 manifestations failed to kill the thing earlier in the day. Lyfe hits Hela with a lightning spear, killing it instantly. She jumped from a building 30 stories tall, made the shot, and landed without injury. The adjutant says that she is the top manifestation, which, considering her performance outside of this one moment, is a pretty damning indictment of the Heimdall force. Mere moments ago, he was saying that she was crazy, reckless, and, depending on the translation, terrible at making in-combat decisions. At the start of this story, she missed this very shot because she was roughed up in some manner more damaging than leaping from a 30-story building. But no matter. Now that she has said she is fighting for the adjutant, she is a combat god. The adjutant, on the other hand, is bleeding all over due to the combat rolls he did while dodging Hela. They retreat into a nearby building to clean his wounds with tap water. The tap water is still running despite gravitational anomalies that are causing cars to float in the streets. Amazing. While Lyfe bandages the adjutant's wounds, he asks her if she's happy now. She says that she is, not because they defeated the Titan, but because he was there with her. Her obsession with killing Titans must have been real for her to chase after one all alone, so this isn't a case of misdirection. She was really singularly obsessed with killing every Titan all the time. Now she's just happy to be by the adjutant's side. This shift took place in one afternoon. We did see hints earlier in this Bond story that she cared about the adjutant's safety and that it could distract her from killing enemies, so it doesn't come out of nowhere, but it still feels rather abrupt that she would sneak out of base on a suicide mission only to realize an hour later that she really just wanted to hang out with the adjutant. It only makes sense if we remember that in the new canon, her Titan obsession is absolute until she directly compares it to spending time with the adjutant. The devs actually told us this was going to happen, in a way. They said that they wanted the stories to revolve around the transformative power of love. The way they seem to have implemented that is that a girl will feel one way about a thing, then will very quickly change course after meeting the adjutant. This is, to an extent, a necessity of the gacha system. They can't spend multiple patches building up a single relationship because they need to focus on whatever operative is on sale. The girls are getting married at a rate of 4 per year, while 12 or so units total are released in that time, and there are 20 or so operatives and counting. It's not going to be unusual for a girl to go over a year without any significant story content before she suddenly gets married, so they have to work quickly. The adjutant then goes on one of his signature monologues in the new canon. This is usually the point where he lays out whatever a girl has been said to care about and neatly resolves all of her internal conflict. In Lyfe's case, he tells her that she doesn't have to hold herself to such a high standard. She doesn't need to be a champion or be Odin somehow. She doesn't need to hide behind a wall when others express themselves to her. Ultimately, he wants her to know that he will always be by her side, no matter what she decides to do. She immediately hugs him. His words suggest that the high standards Lyfe holds herself to are not an expression of an internal motivation, but are instead a response to external expectations. This would explain why her expression of those high standards isn't a drive to hone her combat ability, but depression. She believes she is failing to live up to what others expect her to be. On top of that, the adjutant suggests that Lyfe is hiding herself behind a wall. If we check the Japanese translation again, it says, "We shouldn't build high walls in our hearts. We should be honest about the feelings of others." This must be referring to Lyfe having a cold demeanor and appearing uninterested in the lives of the people around her. This is fine for the new canon, but in the old canon, Lyfe wasn't walling herself off. We learned why she appears cold in an early chapter. In fact, this whole monologue is just a reframing of the way the adjutant described Lyfe in chapter 2. Back then, he noticed that the real Lyfe occasionally revealed herself from under a layer of solid ice, hidden under the nicknames Champion or Odin. The reason why he awkwardly suggests she's trying to be Odin in the new story is because they are recycling this plot point, but also changing the meaning. Also in Chapter 2, the adjutant notices that Lyfe is unexpectedly perceptive when it comes to interpersonal relationships, despite seeming indifferent. He realized that she wasn't bad at interacting with people, she just had other priorities. Later, he learns that she is holding herself to such a high standard of training and vigilance that she simply doesn't have the time for personal interaction. In the new canon, this is transformed into the line about walling herself off when others express themselves to her. Now her indifference doesn't stem from the standard she holds for herself due to how much she cares about others. Instead, it's a separate motivation. Lyfe's motivations in the new canon are simpler and less interwoven. She's emotionally cold and withering under the expectations of others. She wants to kill the Titans due to the events of the descent, and, separately, she prioritizes the safety of people around her over her own well-being. Most of the components of her previous character show up in some way, but the base motivations are expressed differently. Her expression of her high standards is different because those standards are no longer an expression of her desire to protect people. Her desire for vengeance is also no longer an expression of her desire to protect people. As a result, she does not differentiate between a random Hela-type Titan and Ymir, the Titan that killed her parents. All three motivations appear, but they do so separately. It makes sense in this new canon that she would recklessly chase after every Titan she sees. Her hatred of Titans isn't an expression of wanting to protect people, so there's no reason she would temper her desire to kill them based on the actual immediate threat they pose or due to orders from headquarters. She lacks tactical knowledge and combat ability because those were expressions of her high standards that don't exist anymore. Thus, instead of being capable of feats that just seem reckless to others, she attempts those feats anyway in a manner that is actually reckless. She is technically still a powerful soldier, but only when fighting for the adjutant. By herself, or whenever she is in charge, she's reckless and prone to injury. Her growth in the new canon is that she realizes she likes being with the adjutant even more than killing Titans, and he tells her that she doesn't have to be cold or worry about external expectations anymore. After this point, she completely discards her desire to kill Titans and doesn't seem to worry about standards imposed by external motivations. She still appears relatively cold to other people in later material, but we don't see that here as she doesn't interact with anyone except the adjutant in this Bond story. But we didn't actually have to look at her new Bond story to figure that out. In the same patch where Lyfe's Bond story was updated, the devs had each girl send letters to the adjutant. In Lyfe's letter, she directly states that she is obsessed with the adjutant and jokes about how she traded her obsession with the Titans for that. She says she's willing to risk everything to protect him, which we see play out by her concern for him in her new Bond story. She also credits him with inspiring her will to continue living after the descent and saving her by awakening her determination for his love. She appears to have actually been obsessed with the adjutant from the first moment they met. I'm not sure how she went from that to the Titan obsession that we see at the start of her new Bond, but that's just another one of those details. The key is that the adjutant's love is her true obsession in the end. This is a significant change from the old canon. Before, she was ostensibly consumed with vengeance, but channeled it into actually improving her combat abilities. Just like she trained relentlessly to become the champion of the Valkyrie games, she poured her entire soul into honing the strength to crush the Titans. But, even as she did so, she always acted to save the people around her from the Titans. Whether she realized it or not, Her top priority wasn't some obsession, but was in making sure no one else ever had to feel the pain she felt that fateful day when the Titans first appeared. She still loved the adjutant, but in the old canon, it was because she saw that he was willing to make his own life difficult if it meant he could spare someone else some pain. She saw that he tried to understand her instead of writing her off as cold and obsessive. She saw him fighting to save people and helping her do the same. In the old canon, Lyfe's motivations didn't change in order to love the adjutant. She loved him because he was already fighting the same battles as her. They had common values. She didn't give up on some other desire to love him. Her love for him was a natural outgrowth of the desires she already held. Let's get back to that new Bond story now. Their heartfelt moment is interrupted by an alarm from the chorus system. They were too distracted to notice snow beginning to fall, and now the Titans are sure to show up at any moment. There are several more lines and images recycled from the early chapters moving forward. In both this Bond and Chapter 1, they move into a building, one that uses the same image. Both stories note that the walls of the building are unable to stop the snow. One place where they differ is that Lyfe is weakened by the Titagen in her new Bond story. Lyfe's eyes glaze over. She struggles to speak, and the adjutant says she can't hold out against such high levels of contamination. He even tries to shield her body from the snow. By contrast, in Chapter 1, neither Lyfe or Finney is overwhelmed by high levels of contamination, and the snow poses no threat to them. In Chapter 2, the adjutant asks Lyfe and Finney directly if high Titagen contamination is an issue for them. They respond that it's no issue since the levels are no higher than in the drowned sections, the place where this Bond story is set. They will be fine unless they directly touch a Titagen deposit. It seems that the new writers have decided that the force built to fight the Titans should grow faint whenever the Titans show up. A curious decision, but I'm sure Director Tao knows what she's doing. However, there is precedent in the old canon for manifestations being weakened by extreme Titagen levels to the point that their eyesight is affected. In Chapter 10, it is said to spike to a level that was beyond even the manifestation's tolerance. This happens when Ymir appears at the World Tree, the deepest point of the containment zone. However, we're not at the World Tree in this Bond story or in the gardens where it is located. We're in the drowned sections. Ymir also shows up in Chapters 1 and 4 and does not cause a Titagen spike that induces flooding. In fact, even in Chapter 10, the Heimdall force is trapped by Ymir for an extended period, during which the contamination level rises over time. Next, they're forced by the board to engage Ymir, which means getting closer to both the original Titan and the World Tree. There's even a completely unprecedented event spoken of at the start of the Chapter 10 that has Titagen levels drop in the outer sections of the zone and concentrate around the World Tree in the center. Even then, they carry out a large-scale combat operation which takes significant time before they show any signs of Titagen contamination. Eventually, the snow stops and the contamination levels climb steeply. All of this goes to show that this is not a normal occurrence. Manifestations should not be adversely affected by Titagen contamination, except in the most extreme circumstances, or when, like when Lyfe shielded the adjutant from the Titagen-laced bomb in Chapter 2, they come in direct contact with concentrated Titagen deposits, not simply snow. The first manifestation we hear about in the contamination event during Chapter 10 is Haru. Her gaze is said to be drifting in and out of focus. This is likely the reason why Lyfe's eyes are said to glaze over in the new Bond. The writers couldn't simply copy the description of how Lyfe is affected because, in Chapter 10, Lyfe is not negatively affected by the rise in Titagen levels. She is there, she is focused on fighting Ymir, but she isn't bothered by the rise in Titagen because, as we saw in her old Bond story, she had already subdued Odin by that point. so they just copied the first description from a different manifestation instead. We can either read Lyfe's weakness in her new bond is a situation with uniquely high Titagen contamination, like in Chapter 10, or as a retcon of the manifestation's Titagen resistance. In the new canon, we also have the precedent set by Cirrus in her Kasana personal file, where she, too, grew incredibly weak due to Titagen contamination. Ymir didn't even show up in that one, and neither did any other Titan, which suggests that contamination levels don't even have to be all that high. I think we're meant to understand that the manifestations, the beings created to fight the Titans, just become helpless whenever Titagen contamination spikes, such as when Titans appear. But, and this is just one of those details, this does not happen consistently. Earlier in this Bond story, Lyfe had no issue fighting Hela. All we can say for certain is that manifestations resistance being overwhelmed happens far more frequently and at much lower levels of contamination, but it's difficult to establish any level under which they are safe. In fact, this isn't the only detail from Chapter 10 that was copied incorrectly. Remember when the adjutant used the chorus system to track down Hela earlier in this Bond story? Back then, I called the writers out for using the chorus system as a radar because it was never presented as one before, but that's not actually the whole truth. The adjutant did say the chorus system could track Titans in Chapter 10, but it was a lie. While chasing a Hela-type Titan in Chapter 10, the Heimdall force loses track of it. The adjutant says they should pursue it, but an operative, Shinjing, says they lack the means to do so. The adjutant tells her that the chorus system will show them Hela's escape route. She is surprised to hear the device is capable of such a thing, but takes him at his word. Then he narrates to us in no uncertain terms that he lied to her. He is able to sense Hela's location because, moments earlier, he connected to Valhalla, the information network where the Titans live. That's more lore than we have time to explain, but the important information is that the chorus system does not have the ability to track Titans. However, if you're just skimming the old material and taking everything at surface value, you can walk away with that impression. I suspect this is what the new writers did. If they took a similar approach to Lyfe's character, it would also explain why she is, in the new canon, a flattened version of her old canon self, one where every first impression turns out to be completely correct, and the material that used to add depth to her character, such as when we learn that she isn't bad at interpersonal relationships and doesn't prioritize killing Titans over everything, is instead repurposed to reinforce those first impressions. The new Bond story continues with Lyfe proposing a plan to make a mad dash for base. The adjutant says they'll be able to communicate if they get out of the drowned sections and contaminated sections. Earlier, he said that he sent a message 10 minutes before the contamination spike, but also at the last second, and that he couldn't get a reply due to the snow cutting communication right away. I'm not sure when the message was sent, as they didn't notice the snow at first, and there's a big difference between 10 minutes before the spike and at the last second, but we'll just let that go. Anyway, Lyfe, who was just unable to speak with her eyes glazing over, is now sprinting down several city blocks at a time while killing Titans and smaller enemies by lobbing lightning spears. We're gonna let that one go too. Whenever Lyfe appears to be losing control, the adjutant gives her a special Baldur inhibitor made from his spinal fluid. This is an event and image ripped directly out of Chapter 1, though it is now said to be a thing that happens all the time rather than a single time. It's a bit odd because the injection is supposed to be fired from a purpose-made gun. After all, it'd be dumb to expect the adjutant to run into melee range of a flooded manifestation. The reason he hugs her to inject it in Chapter 1 is because he doesn't have time to load the charge. But in her new bond, he always administers it this way, even when he has time to prepare. The duo turns a corner and runs into Ymir. In the images shown, which are ripped from Chapter 4, we see Ymir towering over buildings. It's really not clear how they didn't see her before this unless she just appeared out of nowhere. This is something Titans can do, but they seem to imply that she's visible because they turned a corner, and You know what? We're going to let that go too. The adjutant tries to come up with an escape plan, but says he was constantly rejecting and reworking it. This is a reference to Chapter 10, where Frisha is tasked with coming up with the withdrawal route, but Ymir keeps cutting them off wherever she appears, so Frisha has to constantly rework the escape route. In both Chapter 10 and in the new Bond story, Lyfe says she will take Ymir head on, but whereas she fights it with her team in Chapter 10 and does not flood, her plan in the new Bond story is to just let Odin take over while betting that the adjutant will be able to bring her back after the fact. In another image ripped from Chapter 1, we see Lyfe flood. The adjutant notes that she is far more powerful in this form. He also says that no one has ever intentionally flooded before, but Lyfe is trying it now because she believes it could be enough power to defeat Ymir. By contrast, in Chapter 1, he risked his own safety to prevent her from fighting Ymir while flooded because he doesn't believe she will survive. It certainly makes sense that Ymir would not be so easy to take down, otherwise, why haven't they done it already? It's unclear at this point when this new Bond takes place because they threw out all of Lyfe's character development from the old canon and are using plot points from a spread of 10 chapters, so we don't know if this is the first time Ymir has shown up since the descent, like in Chapter 1, or if she's been antagonizing them frequently, like in Chapter 10. Anyway, the adjutant notes that Lyfe is willing to intentionally flood because she's certain he will bring her back. This fits well with the rest of the Bond story in that her ability to exercise power is entirely based on his presence. Lyfe doesn't seem to have any particular feelings toward Ymir in this story, though we know from elsewhere in the new canon that Ymir still killed her parents in front of her. Her only response to Ymir's presence in this canon is to suggest to the adjutant that she will fight it and he can save her from Odin. This stands in stark contrast to Chapter 1, where both Lyfe and Odin have a grudge against Ymir, which leads to her involuntary flooding. However, Lyfe's concern for the adjutant's well-being overrides her hatred for Ymir once the flooding ceases. She's still upset, she still hates Ymir, but there's another layer to her character. She doesn't want people to be hurt by the Titan's power, and she's crushed that she, while flooded, used the Titan's power to hurt the adjutant. It sets up how she gradually diverges from Odin and is ultimately able to overcome him. The new Bond is also nothing like Chapter 10, where Lyfe has already conquered Odin and faces Ymir without flooding. There, she directly says that she won't let Ymir take anyone away ever again. Same motivation as in Chapter 1, but handled with more maturity. She no longer is a slave to hatred, but she still wants vengeance in order to protect people. However, the entire character arc those moments bookend has been excised in the new canon. Now, Lyfe hates Ymir on paper, but has no response whatsoever to seeing Ymir specifically. Odin also does nothing until she allows him to. The adjutant says he thought Ymir was going to thrash Lyfe, which is very strange. Why did he go along with this plan if he thought she was going to be killed in a completely unfair fight? Anyway, it turns out that Lyfe is fast enough to shoot Ymir a lot with bullets. We'll leave the oddity of her using lightning spears on random enemies while they were running, but bullets on Ymir while Odin is in full control for later. But I want to at least point out that Odin, in the old canon, never lowered himself to using mortal weapons. The adjutant says he never imagined she held such overwhelming, unmatched power. There seems to have been a shift from Lyfe's strength being a result of her own training to being entirely due to her Daewals. This can be seen even earlier by the way that she fights almost exclusively with lightning spears now, whereas in the old canon, that is something that requires the use of the apotheosis system and is considered dangerous enough that she must apply for permission from headquarters to have it unlocked. In terms of game mechanics, this is why she only uses the spears in her ultimate. Ultimate abilities represent the unlocking of the apotheosis system. This is why, in the first mission, your ultimate is literally unavailable until after Lyfe asks Caroline for permission to use the apotheosis system. Returning to the new Bond story, the adjutant also references a time where he personally undid Lyfe's restraints, but whatever he's talking about does not seem to currently exist in the game. The important part is that he sees that a manifestation that has lost control is no different than a Titan. This feels like the sort of observation that should have narrative consequences later. Let's just put a pin in it for now. He goes on to say that she doesn't need him to protect her like she's a child, but doesn't she? This is a Lyfe that snuck out of base and embarked on a doomed mission to kill a single, non-unique Titan. She was so slow that he caught up to her and so unaware of her surroundings that he was able to physically touch her without her noticing his approach. Directly after that, he had to hold her gun in her hand and kill approaching enemies because she was so distracted by his presence. He said himself that she ignores all danger when acting alone, and she's no longer smart or strong enough to complete missions without injury. She sounds like she shouldn't be allowed outside of a padded room without constant supervision. She certainly shouldn't be fighting Titans without someone holding her hand. The only time she has shown any combat prowess has been when he was there to enable it in some way. She's not a champion who has honed her skills due to deeply held motivations, but a foolish kid who holds herself to an impossible standard that she never actually tries to reach. On one hand, I'm glad that he says she doesn't need to be treated like a kid, but it runs counter to everything the story has shown up to this point. This is the same sort of inconsistency that has Lyfe struggling to breathe and keep her eyes open in one moment, then charging down the street killing Titans left and right in the next. Sorry, I digress. Let's get back on task. The adjutant says that if Lyfe could see the power she was wielding while flooded, she would say, "I must control it, not fear it." This is a callback to Lyfe's Wednesday personal foul, where she sees the power granted to her by being a manifestation and declares that she will replace Odin. It may also be an attempt to capture her feelings near the end of that foul, where she says that she doesn't care why she has this power, she's going to use it to kill the Titans. This time, they don't seem to be making explicit changes to the old canon. They do collapse all of that character development into a single line, but the remaining meaning is in the same vein as the previous material. However, since Lyfe surrenders to Odin in the new canon at the narrative climax of her bond, instead of subduing him, the character beat loses much of its punch. Instead of controlling the power, she is portrayed as helpless in the face of it until, suddenly, she isn't. But we'll get to that later. We then skip to the end of the fight. The adjutant says that Ymir vanished in part due to Lyfe and in part due to the saga canon winding up in the distance. This is the only time the saga canon is mentioned in this Bond story, but we're told that it is an electromagnetic canon. We're not told where it is, who is winding it up, or why, but I think we're meant to assume that Yggdrasil is doing it due to the adjutant's message to them earlier. From other sources, we know that Saga is a railgun developed by Yggdrasil and first mentioned in Chapter 9. If we take a step back, however, we can see that the Saga canon exists here to replace the guns deployed by Tau against Ymir in Chapter 4, which may have been a prototype of Saga, as they were also electromagnetic. That incident is where this particular section is stolen from. In fact, the entire Ymir fight is just a quilt of every instance where Ymir shows up in the first 10 chapters, with all the characters except Lyfe and the adjutant removed. They also use background art from those chapters that doesn't include other characters. I've pointed out a few times they did this earlier, but let's run through a few more so that we can better understand why they made these choices. The safe room from the Bond story is the same building the adjutant seemed sheltered in during Ymir's first appearance in Chapter 1. Finney was simply ridden out of the scene, and Lyfe was changed to be critically weakened by Titan contamination as if it spiked like the unique event in Chapter 10. When Lyfe and the adjutant leave the safe room, they flee through the streets and are beset on all sides by Titans. The adjutant says he feels like they received some sort of instruction because they are constantly showing up. This is ripped from the start of Chapter 10, where Tal says that the World Tree is broadcasting commands to all Titans. He wonders if this is one of Edda's tricks, but as we will learn later, he hasn't actually met Edda yet. He claims that this is his first mission as the adjutant, and we'll get to that, but he doesn't learn the name Edda until Chapter 4. She technically appears earlier in Chapters 1 and 2, but he doesn't know who she is until Tal fills him in. However, not long after the line they ripped off about how the Titans are being commanded, Tal says that the events at the World Tree may be Edda's doing. This line was given to the adjutant, even though he should have no knowledge of Edda at this point in the story. Next, Remember how Odin fights Ymir with Lyfe's gun instead of using lightning spears in this new Bond story? This happens because it is just pulled from when the Heimdall Force fights Ymir in Chapter 4. However, in the old canon, Lyfe had already tamed Odin by this point. She does use Odin's power to fight Ymir, but, as the adjutant states at the time, she has taken Odin's power as her own. She orders Ymir to face her while unleashing a stream of bullets. For the new Bond, they copy her fighting style and write the rest of the Heimdall Force out of the story, but they also have to take away her mastery over Odin because that hasn't happened yet. It's notable that they caught that part despite leaving so many other things in. So instead, we get Odin fighting with a conventional firearm, whereas normal Lyfe fights with lightning spears in this Bond story. Odin uses less of his own power when he has full control. Oh, and did you catch that this Bond story is taking place in the drowned sections? In the old canon, the adjutant says that he's in the drowned sections for the first time in Chapter 10. He notes that the Titagen here is crystallized and winds all over the landscape. It's clearly an area incompatible with human life. But, as Finney said back in Chapter 2, it doesn't pose a contamination risk for manifestations unless they touch the crystals. Since the art assets in this Bond are reused, they do not depict the situation accurately as they portray different parts of the containment zone. The choice to have this story take place in the drowned sections, despite it being his first mission as the adjutant, is likely because Ymir showed up in the drowned sections in Chapter 10. Let's also touch back on how Ymir showed up when they turned a corner. The image they use is from Chapter 4, where Ymir assembles herself out of nothing and appears in their path. However, the event they're referencing is likely from Chapter 10, where Ymir turns a corner and spots them. As usual, everyone else is ridden out of the scene. In addition, not long after Ymir appears from around a corner, Frisha talks about rerouting the escape plan in Chapter 10, and the adjutant talks about doing the same in the new Bond story. And about that saga canon, well, in Chapter 4, the Heimdall Force is tasked with retrieving a shrine that attracts Titans. Tau tells him to bring it back to base and deploys what Lyfe refers to as the big guns outside of Gate 7 as a precaution against any Titans that are attracted. Multiple Yggdrasil directors are in the command center for the weapon installation. When Ymir shows up in that chapter, the guns are ready for her. After an accelerated magnetic field finishes charging, Tau orders 40 strikes on Ymir. It works because the Titan has been forced to remain in physical form by the Heimdall Force's attacks. Tau orders 80 more strikes, and Ymir is forced to retreat. In the new Bond story, they don't bother explaining what the weapon is, where it came from, and who's using it because they're just ripping it out of Chapter 4 without the surrounding context. It existed in one of the instances where the Heimdall Force previously fought Ymir, so it got rolled into this story with all of the characters associated with it written out. We can even see this haphazard cut and paste job at play back in the beginning of the Bond story. Lyfe gets banged up fighting a Titan and recklessly chases after it. Meanwhile, at the start of her Wild Hunt personal file, the adjutant says that Lyfe went off alone to fight some Titans and banged up her gear in the process. We know from earlier context in the old canon that she doesn't ignore direct orders or endanger others to kill Titans. We see this in Chapter 1 and it is reinforced in Chapter 2, where we learn her true motivation is to protect the people around her. We also know that the adjutant has never seen her get injured in combat, no matter how reckless her actions seem to be, as he tells us later in the Wild Hunt personal file. What the adjutant means in the opening is exactly what he says. Lyfe's gear is getting beat up because it can't keep up with her. However, if you only read the first couple of lines, you can get the impression that Lyfe is reckless and regularly gets beat up by Titans because of it. You may also think that she would do something like sneak out of base alone to kill a Titan. This suggests that the devs did not intend to make this change to Lyfe's character. Rather, they didn't care enough to closely read the relevant material and bet, successfully, that most of their players didn't care either. Once Ymir leaves, it begins to rain. This transitions us from the hodgepodge of Ymir fights back into old Bond story territory. Back then, when Lyfe found the adjutant, she was using Odin's power and it was raining hard. The rain is important because the adjutant doesn't know if it's her or Odin until she is illuminated by a flash of lightning. Just like before, lightning strikes, Lyfe is illuminated, and the adjutant believes he's facing down Odin. This is a bit of an odd inclusion in the new bond, as the adjutant already knows that Odin is in control. There's no reason for him to doubt this. Their plan from the start was for him to give her an anti-flooding injection after the fight precisely because Odin would be in control. Nevertheless, the reveal scene is dutifully recreated. 4 lines of text are copied directly from the old bond. The stories diverge again at the point where Odin conjures a lightning spear. In the old bond, the adjutant is injured and realizes there's nothing he can do to avoid being killed. In the new bond, he is given a choice to dodge it or tank it. Just for reference, this is the same lightning spear that killed a Hela-type Titan in one shot earlier in this bond story. It's not the sort of thing one survives. During that fight with Hela, the adjutant sustained several injuries just from dodge rolling. Still, if he chooses to tank the lightning spear, it pierces his heart and he just shrugs it off. He then immediately wrestles Odin against a wall. Going back to that Hela fight, Lyfe jumped off a 30-story building and landed without injury. She is much, much more powerful when flooded, as the adjutant observed earlier. But somehow the adjutant is able to wrestle her into submission. She struggles in his grasp, somehow, and once again, her power level is wildly fluctuating. The adjutant says something about this being his first mission as the adjutant, despite it being his second mission as the adjutant in this bond story, but again, we'll talk about that in a bit. He mentions that an electrical current is running through his body due to their proximity, and that his hair seems to be burning. However, he declares that he will not let go, and even yells for Odin to give Lyfe back. As if on cue, Odin does exactly that. Lyfe audibly tells Odin to fuck off, and once again, the new and old bond stories converge. Without warning, the lightning dissipates, and Lyfe falls into the adjutant's arms. He fears the worst, but it turns out that she's simply exhausted. This moment is the narrative climax of both bond stories. It's worth taking a moment to unpack it. In the new bond, the climactic moment is when the adjutant shows the lengths he will go to in order to bring Lyfe back from her flooded condition. In this canon, the injections appear to be melee only, but he is prepared to wrestle a god to attempt to administer one. We can give the world-building implications of his ability to perform this feat a pass for now. Let's just focus on what it means in terms of narrative. He engages Odin in battle and is at least burned for his trouble. At one point, he says his head feels like it's about to explode, but he refuses to let go. His motivations are spoken plainly in the line where he tells Odin to give Lyfe back. In short, it is a story about how the adjutant will fight for Lyfe. In the old bond, the climactic moment is when Lyfe shows the lengths she will go to in order to bring the adjutant back from his doomed mission. Odin attempts to emerge when she is being overwhelmed by enemies, but she forces him into submission because he only wants to kill Titans. He isn't going to save the adjutant. However, when she finally finds the adjutant, she is using Odin's power. This implies that at some point she took his power and controlled it enough that he was forced to track down and rescue the adjutant. Then, she forces him into submission again when he threatens the adjutant. Her mastery over him isn't perfect, but she subdues a god in order to rescue someone important to her, just as she said she would in her Wednesday personal foul. We see later, in Chapter 4, that she is able to use Odin's power without flooding, though she still uses her gun to fight, so it's clear she has some room to improve. In short, the new bond is a story about the adjutant. The old bond is a story about Lyfe. This is why we don't get any reaction from Lyfe when Ymir shows up in the new bond. The story isn't interested in her motivations, except for where they have to do with loving the adjutant. Her response to Ymir is the same as it would be for any strong foe. She sets up a situation where the adjutant is the key to enabling her power, where he gets to take center stage. like when they fought Hela. She plainly states after killing Hela that being by the adjutant's side is better than killing Titans. We don't get any sense of why she was so adamant about chasing down a particular Hela-type Titan. We don't know why she never did this in the 3 years that the adjutant was away. And despite her feeling strongly enough about it that she makes the incredibly dumb decision to chase it into the drowned sections, she completely erases those feelings in one conversation. This isn't so much character growth as Lyfe simply becoming a different person halfway through the story. But this is fine for the new canon, because the story isn't about her motivations or growth. It's about the adjutant. All Lyfe has to do is realize that loving the adjutant is more important than whatever her initial characterization was. She can then toss all of that aside to worry about nothing except expressing her affection. Once again, this is the transformative power of love that the devs are trying to show us. Before we move on, let's finally address the adjutant's claim that this is his first mission as the adjutant. We know this can't be true, as he was returning from a mission where he was the adjutant at the start of this Bond story. His conversation at that time makes clear that even that wasn't his first mission. He seems to have spent significant time with Lyfe and the other operatives. So why does he claim it's his first mission? Well, as you may have guessed, it's because they're ripping story elements from Chapter 1, where he was, in fact, on his first mission as the adjutant. At that time, Lyfe flooded after encountering Ymir, and the adjutant had no time to load the necessary injection into a dispenser, so he hugged her and administered it directly. It was a costly choice, as she broke several of his ribs and the electricity surrounding her body nearly did him in, but he managed to hold on for the brief moment it took for the injection to kick in. In the new Bond, they jazz up his actions to include tanking a lightning spear to the heart, wrestling Odin and pinning him against the wall. But it's the same moment, loosely speaking. They just ripped it out of Chapter 1 and inserted it into Lyfe's Bond story instead. As we saw them do so many times earlier, they ended up pulling in unnecessary things, like the fact that it was his first mission as the adjutant, which creates an inconsistent internal canon for the new Bond. Like with earlier changes, the new context of the action significantly changes its meaning. Back in Chapter 1, this moment was still pivotal for the adjutant for the same reason. It showed how far he was willing to go to keep Lyfe from losing herself to Odin. However, it was also a significant moment for Lyfe herself. She was so upset that she lost control and hurt someone that she sat in the corner and cried for a while, even though Ymir was still around. This indicated that she had additional motivations beyond wanting to kill Titans and beyond even getting vengeance on Ymir specifically. It set up her growth over the next 2 chapters, where we learned that her core motivation was actually protecting people from Titans. Killing them was just the means to that end. However, in the new Bond, Lyfe never experienced that character arc. She wants to kill Titans. End of story. So when the moment is repurposed, it only builds the adjutant's characterization and drops Lyfe's entirely. We still hear that Lyfe cares about protecting other people, but we hear it from the adjutant instead of Lyfe, and the meaning is obscured in the English text due to the use of machine translation. As of patch 2.6, the machine translated error is still live. The moment is nominally shown when Lyfe momentarily says she'll hold Hela off if things go south, but this should more likely be read as being motivated by her affection for the adjutant specifically. Once again, the gap between who the adjutant says she is and who she appears to be in the story is jarring. However, there's one other significant change to this moment. In the new Bond, the adjutant has dropped the injection and has no way to release Lyfe from flooding like in Chapter 1. Instead, Lyfe manages to subdue Odin herself with the adjutant's encouragement. It's a blink and you'll miss it moment, but it's also most of the characterization she gets in the new Bond. Unfortunately, by melding these moments together in a story that centers around the adjutant, we don't get anywhere near the same narrative payoff. Unlike in the old Bond, we don't see Lyfe controlling Odin and forcing him to do her bidding. She gets one line this time, and it's not at all clear that she has any mastery over him, since he never does anything he wouldn't do normally. The only reason we can be somewhat confident that she momentarily subdued Odin is because she did it in the old Bond. Without that, it's just as likely the adjutant scared him off by yelling at him and pushing him around. Curiously, if we look at the story summary for this section, they say that Lyfe eventually conquered her Dayros and came to. They didn't intend to change that part of her character, but by refusing to give Lyfe the spotlight in her Bond story, it no longer comes across clearly. They remove the build-up to her feat and most of the evidence of it. Rather than being the climax of her story in this Bond, it is now a footnote to the adjutant's story. The two are then rescued. In the new Bond, the adjutant says he's taking Lyfe home as reinforcements approach due to his previous call, we presume. A day later, the adjutant wakes up in the medbay. He sees a message from Tao, who isn't happy about their foray into the drowned sections, but that's the last we hear of that. His room is full of gifts from various operatives. He leaves the room to talk to Lyfe, who is pacing outside, and we're told, again, that she is cold as ice in the eyes of others, but warm toward him. She tells him that she doesn't want to lose him again and adds, quote, "I'll make sure it never," unquote. She might be referring to the adjutant going missing for 3 years in space, but there isn't enough of a narrative through line in the story for me to be confident about that. This is the first time in the entire Bond story that she has expressed any feelings about missing him while he was gone. We know that she did miss him due to other material, and we know that this line is a belated response to him telling her that he will always be by her side no matter what she decides to do. But why is she suddenly worried that he will disappear? It may be a response to seeing him injured, but his injuries are never mentioned, and he seemed well enough to carry her home just a moment ago. He is up and about after a single day of rest, after all. It's ambiguous enough that I looked for other possible meanings. The line is eerily similar to one she drops while fighting Ymir in Chapter 10. At that time, Ymir has grabbed the adjutant and transported him to Valhalla, the information space where Titans reside. Lyfe rallies the Heimdall force to take the adjutant back and says to Ymir, "I won't let you take anyone away again." In that context, it serves as a capstone to her character arc over the first 10 chapters, her personal files, and her old Bond story. She is fighting to prevent the Titans from taking anyone away from anyone. In the new Bond, it seems to be a reiteration of her desire to remain by the adjutant's side. We must also consider the possibility that there isn't any narrative through line here. She may just be stating her new motivation again. Lyfe's old Bond story carried on for a bit longer since it still needed to wrap up the adjutant's narrative thread. The two recuperated for 3 days, then the adjutant shielded Lyfe from Tao's punishment by saying a rigid adherence to the rules would have resulted in his death. Next, he finally apologized to her for what he calls his earlier mistake. His arc over the course of the old Bond played out by recognizing that he valued Lyfe's trust more than some illusion of his own perfection. He understood his call was reasonable in general, but that Lyfe could have handled the situation. Even if it wasn't a pure blunder, he understood why she was upset over it, and her feelings were more important to him than his own rigid adherence to being blameless. However, Lyfe surprises him by apologizing herself. Her arc throughout the old Bond played out in part by subduing Odin, but also by realizing that her interpersonal relationships were more important than her rigid adherence to vengeance. She acknowledges that the adjutant's decision was generally sound. After all, he made it due to prioritizing the safety of the people around him. Then she invites him out for a drink. The two learn parallel lessons whose seeds were planted in previous material. They both walk out of the story with a greater appreciation for how they can be a better friend and partner for the other. In the old bond, both Lyfe and the adjutant grow as characters. They don't lose any of the motivation that they had going in, but they refine it. They change how their motivations are expressed, especially how they are expressed to each other. In the new bond, the adjutant comes out the same as he went in. We get to see him do some cool things, but he never faces any obstacle that forces him to change. Lyfe, on the other hand, changes one aspect of herself completely. She seems to lose all animosity towards Titans while gaining a deep obsession with the adjutant instead. This doesn't seem to affect any other aspect of her character, like how she interacts with other people besides the adjutant. Whereas the old bond builds a strong foundation for romance, the new sidesteps this entirely by having the two pledge to always be together for reasons that are not shown within the story. Both approaches are fine in their own way, but they are very different. We should also acknowledge that there may, eventually, be a rewrite of the early chapters. The devs already made almost everything non-canon by pulling it into this Bond story with all the context removed. It's possible that Lyfe's new Bond will be situated differently if and when this new material drops. However, I don't expect that the major contours will change. Let's look at one last personal foul to see why. Lyfe's Infinite Sight personal foul came out in the same patch as her Bond story changes. Like her new Bond, it covers some events that played out in the early chapters in a new way, but it also gives us a sort of origin story for Lyfe's affection. It covers the period after the return from New Hintero and before the wedding, though they are already considered a couple. It reprises some Valkyrie Games info with minor retcons, and this time, the adjutant spoke to Lyfe while she was in a coma, which caused her to fall in love with him. Elsewhere, she says that he restored her will to live after the descent, which I assume is what happened here. The only problem is that she seems to have first fixated on him, then fixated on vengeance to the point where we get the opening events of her new Bond, then she swaps back to being obsessed with him. Since the origin of her love is essentially the same time the Titans show up, it's extremely awkward trying to place a story where she prioritizes something else over his love. Remember, this is the Lyfe that is said to care about nothing except vengeance, but she still finds a way to be obsessed with the adjutant. It kind of undermines the later transformation by love. Anyway, when he returned from space in the escape pod, she greeted him warmly with a smile. The foul can be summed up in one sentence. Only the adjutant can offer Lyfe's salvation. The adjutant explores an alternate reality within Lyfe's mind. The mechanics of how this happens aren't really important here. We're given a brief remake of Chapter 1 with everyone cut out except for Lyfe and Caroline, though it takes place in an alternate timeline. The adjutant is referred to as the hero that saved Lyfe and the former head of the security department. Caroline says he led a team to the space station over a month after the descent. She warns Lyfe that the boss doesn't want complications, so she should try not to engage any Titans. Lyfe hesitates, then says she will do her best. On one hand, I want to read this as meaning that the new Lyfe isn't actually singularly concerned with vengeance. Perhaps she, like old Lyfe, has a bit more nuance to her character than initial reports convey. She seems to want to kill Titans and reunite with the adjutant, though we don't actually get to see those two possible motivations ever put into conflict. As a result, it feels more like an echo of a past character that no longer exists. She finds the pot without incident and asks the person inside, "Whoever's in there, can you hear me? Move away from the hatch. Protect your vital areas." These lines are lifted verbatim from Chapter 1. However, in this alternate timeline, the pod is empty. Lyfe is upset, which seems to affect the area around her. Numerous giant Titans show up and she fights them. She is inexplicably in her Infinite Sight form. This shouldn't be possible, but it's probably just a compromise since they chose to remake Chapter 1 into a personal file for that exosuit. we shouldn't worry about the narrative implications. Lyfe's despair causes world trees made of Titagen to spawn all over the planet as space and time break down around her. The event is dubbed Fimbulvetr and originally took place in a somewhat different way at the end of Chapter 11 in the Old Canon. In this alternate reality, the Hydro Force still fights the Titans, but one by one, they become flooded and end up causing calamities comparable to the Descent. When the adjutant says in Lyfe's new bond that a flooded manifestation is no different than a Titan, this is what he was referring to. During this sequence, numerous art assets from throughout the first 10 chapters are used. Lyfe is said to be consumed by an inner fire of rage. Odin eventually takes over and collaborates with Rosen, a new enemy introduced in the patch this story released in. The adjutant swaps to a new timeline. He meets Lyfe as she is in a special location where she was meant to speak to her Devils. A full explanation will require another video, so I'll just briefly cover the important parts here. She says that she has already tamed Odin and asks who he is. The real Lyfe, who is also there, I guess, explains to this alternate Lyfe who she is. A Lyfe who never joined the Valkyrie Games and instead joined Yggdrasil as a doctor and eventually met the adjutant. This other Lyfe never became a manifestation, but did become a director at the company and used every means to protect the adjutant. There is also another Lyfe present, the one from earlier, who failed to rescue the adjutant and whose life was consumed by a singular focus on vengeance. Lyfe from our timeline says that she and the adjutant brought each other salvation in a way none of the others did. The vision ends. Lyfe says that peeking into other timelines is a new ability of hers that she can't quite control yet. She credits the adjutant with saving her once again since he found her in her mind. Apparently, these alternate lives were trying to deceive her. It's not really clear or important. She says that if they continue to bother her, she will delete them from her mind. He tells her that she shouldn't delete her alternate timeline consciousnesses because they may be helpful going forward. She immediately reverses her decision to do so. This is a reference to something covered in a base event. In the old canon, the adjutant told Lyfe that he learned a unique technique for forgetting that helped him control the Titagen as if he was formatting pieces of his memory. He says if painful memories could be formatted, then only powerful abilities would be left behind. Lyfe agrees that formatting memories might be useful to avoid going crazy, but says that anything will always have inherent meaning in its existence. She feels like remembering the painful memories in her heart is precisely what made her stronger. This is a nod to how her desire to save others from the sorts of painful memories she has drove her to obtain her current strength. In the new canon, Lyfe is the one who suggests forgetting bothersome things in her mind. The adjutant rejects it and she instantly changes course. The adjutant also answers an existential question posed to Lyfe earlier by Tao. She was asked, "What do you want to become?" And he tells her that who you are depends on what you choose to become. She likes the answer. In both of these cases, the adjutant is the one making the decisions and Lyfe just agrees. In the earlier case, they rewrote a scene from the old canon to strip agency from Lyfe and give it to the adjutant instead. The reason for this rewrite is likely the same reason that Lyfe had to screw up in her new Bond story instead of questioning the adjutant's call. They don't want her to ever push back against the adjutant or to be seen in anything resembling a superior position. In the Bond story, they had to get rid of Lyfe's disagreement with the adjutant because he's now the sole reason she has to exist. Whatever he says, she does. She doesn't form or hold her own opinions, and certainly would never choose a course of action contrary to his plans. So instead of the adjutant making a perceived mistake, Lyfe takes the fall. The purpose wasn't to make her look weak so much as to make him look strong. This is why she appears completely different outside of the Bond story. She's still strong in combat, though her tactical prowess is absent because she's not allowed to show up the adjutant in any way. This also makes the adjutant promise from her new bond that he will stay by her side no matter what she decides to do rather hollow. He is the one making all of these decisions for her. There is no possibility that this new Lyfe will ever decide to do something he isn't already cool with, because her primary and perhaps only motivation is remaining by his side. Lyfe declares that she is the strongest in the Heimdall force in the adjutant's right hand. She says that the vision in their eyes is the same and immediately proposes to marry him. I can't help but wonder what vision she's talking about, though. In her letter, she said that fighting the Titans is just something she does because it's her job as a soldier under the adjutant. She's motivated to get stronger because it makes her more useful to the adjutant. This new Lyfe has defined herself entirely based on the adjutant. Her vision is simply to follow him. Thus, it's not that the vision in their eyes is the same, so much as her vision is just a reflection of his will. In the new canon, Lyfe begins as a character who only cares about vengeance. She swaps that obsession out with an obsession for the adjutant's love. She completely reorients her entire existence around serving him, while all facets of her character that could conflict with this are discarded. She's not his partner because she doesn't have any agency. There is no possibility of her ever wanting something more than she wants his approval, not in this timeline or any others. This is the primary reason that the new romance doesn't work for me. Instead of two characters fighting for the same goal in different ways, a true alignment of visions, we have one character who never makes mistakes and someone who has essentially no will of her own. What do you love about someone whose only character trait is following everything you say? We didn't get to it in this video, but there's still much more material about Lyfe in the old canon and a bit more in the new canon as well. In the old canon, her character continues to develop as she faces new challenges. Her strength grows, as does her relationship with the adjutant. Perhaps we'll talk about it another time. In the new canon, Lyfe steadfastly maintains her promise to always be by the adjutant's side. She doesn't show up much in the main story after the patch where these changes take place, but she does pop up at least once per patch to kiss or pet him. Her base events and other supplemental material change to recalling romantic trysts or trying out various activities from a book she has on things a good wife should do for her husband. Here and there, in the main story at least, we see echoes of who Lyfe used to be, but the new Lyfe is a fundamentally different character by design. The role she's meant to play is different, so she had to change as well. I want to reiterate that there's nothing wrong with liking the new Lyfe. While the character traits I liked about her didn't make the cut, your experience may vary. As I said before, my goal isn't to say that one is universally better than the other. I'm not here to police your preferences, though I do have my own. What I hope to do is explain why they feel so different, at least to someone who has a, perhaps, unhealthy obsession with Snowbreak lore. If you skimmed or skipped the story, or if you joined the game late and didn't have time to unlock and see all of her bond stories, personal files, base lore, and so on, she may not feel all that different to you. For instance, I could see people that believe she was obsessed with killing Titans and that she would, in the old canon, tunnel vision after them like an edgy anime protagonist. If that's who Lyfe was to you, she'll feel very familiar in the new canon. And if you were one of the many new players that joined right before or during the patch where she changed, you are initially led to believe that she is that way. Thus, it really doesn't make sense to attack players who feel she hasn't changed. From their perspective, she likely hasn't. As Snowbreak continues down this path, we'll likely see more characters simplified to a before and after style of motivation. We'll also likely continue the pattern of characters that are deeply in love with the adjutant very soon after, or sometimes even before, meeting him. There simply isn't time to do the sort of relationship building that went on before, especially since the demands of the new direction have required the game to abandon many of the available shortcuts used in other stories. In Chapter 11, for example, we were treated to an impactful story because every new element was already tied to known quantities in the game world. We didn't need to spend much time figuring out Haru's motivations. We already knew about her relationship with her father. Put her in a story with the squad that murdered him and the plot nearly writes itself. We also see a dark side of Yggdrasil and additional lore from many characters because there are so many existing relationships that were used to quickly situate players. The adjutant even gets to play off a character who previously led a special team to do Yggdrasil's bidding. That kind of story is impossible to tell unless a character is allowed to express their motivations in a way that may cause them to disagree with the adjutant or act outside of his desires. When they have some strong desire for something beyond simply being by the adjutant's side, the closest we get to that now is when someone pushes back on his decisions out of concern for his safety. As a result, stories must lean heavily on the adjutant himself. He's not just the main character. The stories are about him specifically. Just like with Lyfe's Bond story, that necessarily means that we have less space for complex motivations from other characters. In Lyfe's case, the way she related to Ymir, other operatives, and people threatened by Titans was simplified. Her new Bond no longer explores any of that with any depth, despite being much longer by word count than her old Bond. In Sirius's case, the way she related to her neurological condition, other operatives, and to friends was simplified. She now has people she doesn't consider worth remembering and a person that she does. It's much easier to juggle these simpler characters with the demands of the harem. You can write entire scenes where everyone's motivation is securing the adjutant's affection or being concerned about him. Different characters may have some surface level identifiers like a verbal tic, a nickname, or a basic mode of expression like obsessive or shy, but there's no need to justify their actions according to 20 different complex motivations. For the adjutant himself, his plot beats have been reduced to sacrificing himself left and right. He isn't allowed to be outmaneuvered since he's the sole focus of the story. Sometimes we fake at that only to find out that he was 10 steps ahead the whole time. Every narrative climax has to not only involve him, but center him. Just like we saw with Lyfe's mastery over Odin, this doesn't necessarily mean that other characters can't be involved, but they do have to cede focus to the adjutant. The most common way this is done while involving other characters is by having him make a sacrifice so that they can express concern over him, or by having a character monologue for a while and then directly attribute any change in their thinking to the adjutant. But that's really an entire other video. In both canons, building a relationship with the adjutant is part of Lyfe's motivation. As one might expect, it is a larger part of her motivation in the new canon. However, on top of that, her other motivations were diminished and simplified. Whereas they previously cascaded from each other in a progression of expressions, they are now all base level. Before, she wanted to protect people around her, so she felt the need to kill Titans, which meant she needed to use the Titan's power, and also resulted in her propensity to sacrifice herself to protect others, and her insane treading regimen, which itself led to her appearing cold to other people. Now, she still said to put herself in danger to protect others, and she wanted to kill Titans, and she said to want to control the power of Titans and has a cold demeanor, but these are all separate motivations. They don't flow from one another. That is to say, they aren't well expressed. The only time she expresses a motivation is when it comes to remaining by the adjutant's side. In the new canon, for instance, it is her desire to be useful to the adjutant that lets her tap into her strength. Next time, we'll explore how these changes to her motivation play out. We'll compare the Lyfe from chapters 4 through 10 and the first events to the Lyfe from patch 2.0 and beyond. We'll see that they're both characters in their own right, with mostly similar motivations on paper, but that these motivations are expressed in dramatically different ways, which leads to them feeling very different in practice and having very different journeys in terms of character growth. This is just something that can happen when you're following a live service game. It can, at any time, radically change. I'm not so petty as to take that out on the players. Usually. Nobody's perfect. However, I am fascinated by what sorts of things have to give. For as long as Snowbreak keeps changing, I'll be here compiling the old canon and contrasting it with the new.